Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina, for people of all ages and walks of life. With more than 40 years and a new second location to its name, Acme is a multiple-time Eisner Award nominee. The shop features a significant contemporary and vintage selection, as the Acme team uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville Rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. 30 years ago, I stood in front of a comic shop advertising the death of Superman in its window display. That moment outside Heroes World set me on a path, a lifelong fan journey leading directly from that tattered red cape to this podcast. Now, together, we mine Superman's vast 85-year mythology by examining, discovering, and reconsidering the stories that have shaped the last son of Krypton. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the miniseries Superman American Alien is real-life Lobo cosplayer and returning guest Justin DeVoe. Justin, welcome back.
I'm back, everybody. Aren't you excited? You're like, oh, this guy. Here we go. Dude, I'm stoked, man. We've been talking about this forever. But like we always do, you call me up, you're like, hey, do you want to do it on this? I'm like, I'll do it on whatever. You'd be like, some of that doorknobs that he's touched. I'm like, yeah, let's do doorknobs. Like, I don't even care. I always get so excited. But the early on, the early on prop I want to give you is I always had some sort of Superman book on my pull list, never went into back issues and stuff. I thought very early on he was unrelatable, as you've heard from fucking people all over the place. Then I started taking some of your recommendations. Then I started reading stuff specifically for you for this. And let me tell you something, man. I left a lot of gold out in the past because that Superman for All Seasons made me cry like 6 times, dude. Like that. I'm just about to start Kryptonite. I got the whole list of ones you're giving me. And now as I'm going through them, I'm like, there's so much depth. And like, we know this, we've talked about it. But I was only talking about it through a lens of like this, like the stuff that you get me to watch, right? Or the stuff you get me to read. There's so much depth in the thought process of him. It's not just like, I'm going to go punch stuff and fucking up and away. Like, it's not that. There's so much more, which is like, damn, I'm so glad because now I got a whole stack of Superman stuff that I want to read and I want to pick up War World. Like now I'm in, dude. Like you got me in. So thank you very much because there's a bunch of stuff in there that's just brilliant.
All right, mission accomplished. My work here is done. No, that's awesome. I'm really appreciative of that. It means a lot that you've taken those recommendations, and it's very gratifying that you've been enjoying them. And as far as you coming on here to talk about this, it's always great to have you here. You always bring so much energy. You're always so
I'm going to try.
Whatever I ask you to do, you always come with so much enthusiasm, and I appreciate it. And just on a personal note, I mentioned this at the end of the last episode on For All Seasons. I had Tyler on from Krypton Report, but since the last time you were here, you got married. So congratulations on the
You were there.
I was there.
You were there. It was awesome. It seems like everyone had a really good time. Sarah's the best. I obviously wasn't going to pass that up. It was great. But everything people said about weddings, because my first one it was very small. It was 2 people. Hunter was on the way. It was a shotgun joint, right? I love his mom. She's awesome. But it was more of a trial. This one was a lot of setup. Holy shit, expensive. Like, they're not lying, folks. Like, whew. But when it actually came down to it, it goes by fast. Like, people have said that, like, you don't eat, it's going to go by fast. When people started leaving, I'm like, oh, shit, I hope people are having a good time. It was like 11:40. I was like, oh, where did the night go? But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Everyone had a good time, from what I understand. The food was awesome. And now people are asking me, like, what's it like being married? I'm like, exactly the same. The only thing is I got to stop trying to take my ring off at the end of the night because I'm not used to having jewelry on. So I go to take it off. I'm like, oh, no, this one doesn't come off now. But that's awesome, man. We were so glad you could make it. You guys were great.
No, we were honored to be there and so happy for you and Sarah. And I said this at the end of the last episode, but the reason we connected and I was there and everything was because of the podcasting. That's how you and I first connected. So it's a beautiful thing.
Right.
And
it was again, Gavin and then podcasting, who was also invited, but he couldn't make it. He got some other stuff to do. But when I was writing the thing for my friend Audrey to read, it was a conglomeration of different comic book quotes. And your sign off was in it. It's about what you do. It's about action was in there. And I'm looking through the crowd because I'm trying to see you on my way up. And I was like, I got to find him because I got to see. And I couldn't find you. And I couldn't even turn my head at that point because that would have just looked weird. But I was like, I hope he heard it and went, yeah, like I got excited, man. But alas, I did not see your face, but I knew it was out there. So it was good.
Oh, the moment was not lost on me. I was thrilled to hear it. And even as it was being read, I saw the look in your eyes. I saw you scanning briefly, and I was looking at you, but I think I was too far back or to the side. But no, I was all there for it. So it was fantastic. So
it was very cool. It was very cool.
Here we are to discuss Superman American Alien. This was a 7-issue miniseries published by DC between 2015 and 2016. And depending on your perspective, you might be wondering how we could have possibly not done a standalone episode on this before now. Or on the other hand, you might be wondering how could we possibly be doing a standalone episode on this at all? So we'll address the elephant in the room. This is written by screenwriter Max Landis, son of famed Hollywood director John Landis. And a few years ago, a number of women came forward and accused Max Landis of a range of sexual and emotional abuse. And his career has largely stalled out since then, which is why you haven't heard much from him in the intervening years. And I guess what I just want to say is what I've said in the past when we've encountered this question of whether and to what extent we can or should separate the art from the artist.
Art from the artist, yeah.
Right. And this came up in particular when we covered Superman Returns, directed by Bryan Singer and starring Kevin Spacey. And like I said then, I do believe this is a personal internal calculus that each person needs to undertake for themselves. So I don't make any blanket statements for anybody else or even for myself, because it is kind of a case-by-case basis. I'll say for me, generally speaking, my default, and I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, but generally my feeling tends to be, I don't want to pretend that something doesn't exist.
Sure.
This is out there. It's part of the Superman canon. It was a fairly significant inspiration for the Superman Man of Tomorrow animated movie. We had screenwriter Tim Sheridan on. He cited this. I wouldn't be surprised if there are elements from this that might pop up, for example, in the upcoming Superman movie. So it's out there. It's part of the lore. This also wasn't the work of a singular person. This wasn't a novel written by Max Landis. This was a comic in a collaborative medium. And one of the things that's distinct about this particular miniseries is rather than a cohesive narrative over 7 issues, it's really a collection of 7 vignettes, each one picking up with Clark at a distinct period in his journey, and each issue has a distinct tone and is drawn by a different art team. So you have 7 different art teams who worked on this miniseries. So there are a lot of other people's work at play here as well. So for those reasons, I felt that it was worth talking about. And we're not here to celebrate the writer of this. That's not what this is about, but rather to critically analyze and discuss this miniseries, which exists within the larger Superman mythology. So that's why we're here and sort of my thought process behind it.
I didn't even know. Like, you know me, a lot of people do. If it's in my face, I get it. But there's some shit I didn't know. Like, I didn't know Bryan Singer was a weirdo until afterwards. And that's why I was like, oh, maybe they kept giving him work because he had dirt on somebody. I had no idea about the Max Landis thing. I posted that I was reading it and people were like, I would never read that. I'm like, all right, why? Because I didn't know. When they told me, I'm like, all right, well, that's fucked up, right? Like, of course. But did Jay Lee and like Dragata break their fingers because they worked with the dude? No, because at the time they didn't know, right? So where do you draw the line, right? We always talk about the art for the artist thing, but people are going to have, like, their mileage varies based on what they like. Like, it really does. I'm talking about the negative people, right? I brought it up before the show started. Everyone loves their Cthulhu plushes and they love talking about all the ancient monsters or whatever. Have you read or even read the titles of some of H.P. Lovecraft's early work? The guy he said Hitler, he's a clown, but I like that boy. And let's not even get started with how he said that black people got to this planet. All right. But no one has a problem with that. No one has a problem with all the references. They love their D&D games starring it. They won't have a problem with that because that's something that they enjoy. They're not going to plant their flag there. We read a comic written by a guy that later had all these problems. That's fine. This still exists. We're not going to read it and burn it. It's something that was a part of the Superman mythos, because if you want to do that, then you better start giving me backgrounds on everybody that you know, all the writers, all the directors, everyone. Did you do your research on all of them? Because if you did that, I will listen to you. But if you're only planting your flags on stuff that jumped out and you're not going to do that extra legwork to find out that your person is squeaky clean, I don't want to hear your shit. I don't. I probably would have never picked this up if I wasn't on like my everything Anthony gives me is gold. And it has been. It's been awesome. But okay, I read it. I didn't immediately write the guy a love letter afterwards. Yeah, what he did is messed up, but this is out there. It's still being published. His life is in the toilet. But as a comic together, yeah, I want to read it. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm not going to be like, he's so great. The story is, a lot of the story pieces are, but no one's trying to negate what he did. Just like people who went to go see the Flash movie. They're not saying, I support Ezra Miller. They're saying, hey, what about the other people in the movie too? So your mileage is going to vary. You can hate what I said or not, but we're here to talk about a Superman comic. Anthony was nice enough to put that on Front Street because technically he didn't have to. It's a Superman comic, man. So enjoy the conversation. Neither one of us says what he did was good. But of course he's a piece of shit. That's not the point. The point is that we're here to talk about a Superman comic because it's a fucking Superman podcast. So everyone settle down and enjoy the ride. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. All right. So that's all out there. We wanted to address that right at the top and get into this. So like I said, this has come up in at least one conversation before when we covered the tellings of the origin story post-crisis. So we've acknowledged this at least briefly. But we've never done a dedicated episode on it. Actually, one of our patrons had reached out and sent me a message and asked, was I going to do one? And I had kind of been kicking it around. And so it ended up being a little bit of a two-parter. Last week, we looked at Superman for All Seasons again, and now we're looking at American Alien. And there are many differences between these stories, but where they are alike, I feel, is that they're not straight, hard retellings of the origin with those big tentpole moments, but rather they're stories about the moments in between that show you how Clark became who he is. But like I said, this is different even than For All Seasons. For All Seasons, once we got past that initial spring season, we had a time jump, but then the remaining seasons all took place within that same year one. Mm-hmm. Whereas here we're covering a much wider period of time in Clark's life. This is how DC Comics describes it. I'm reading from the back cover of the hardcover that I have. They say, this is not a Superman comic. This is the story of Clark Kent, a Kansas farm boy who happens to be from another planet. It's the story of a scared young kid with impossible powers, of a teenage delinquent with a lot to learn, of a reporter with a nose for the truth who's keeping the biggest secret the world has ever known. This is not the Superman you know, not yet. I did not read this as it was originally coming out. This was during some sort of my down period as a comics reader. So I came to it a little while later. And I think this is only probably the third time that I've ever read it. And I'm glad that we're doing this episode now because I feel like I have a far more fully developed take on it than I've ever had before. Right. So I'm really curious to get your thoughts because as you were starting to read this, you sent off a flurry of messages via Facebook.
I usually always do, yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, this is going to be great," because you had some strong feelings as you were starting to read this. So, do you want to tell me just what those impressions were and how, if at all, they changed as you got from those initial issues to the conclusion?
So it did change. Near the end, I was like, "This is awesome," right? Even the Lobo fight, which we'll get to down the line, because you know me, I'll tangent and jump all over the place. So I'm like, "Let's go by birds," because we go by birds. I can focus just on that. I think one of the reasons why I didn't like it at first is because I didn't like the Jonathan and Martha of it all. And now this is your third read through, right? It's my first. They didn't seem like they wanted anything to do with the life that they lived, period. Where it was just like, even the faces that they made. Plus, I didn't like the Riverdale, like Jagada's a talented dude, did not like a lot of the ways. Like it looked like nightmare fuel. in some spots, like young Clark with like the big, almost like 1990s anime eyes, like the big like loop and then like the line underneath. I didn't like a lot of that, but my biggest part was I like me some older Kents, right? Like he fell in every other one. They're older, right? They can't have kids and stuff like that. In this one, they're showing like pictures of them like as hippies and they're like surfing and like Jonathan's a lawyer. I'm like, wait a minute, like what are you doing? And I like to pick apart the art, right? So when Jonathan's talking to Clark, he's petrified, dude. It's almost like he doesn't want him. As a matter of fact, 2 spots, he almost tried to hurt him intentionally, I think, to get rid of him. Like I really do, man. Like it was crazy with the helicopter thing and then the car. Like he jams on it and he looks over. I was like, I didn't like their lackadaisical. Dude, they didn't even want to be in Kansas. Like they just ended up there because they got a farm. So I didn't like the non-caring, like they seem like non-caring Kents to me. Like that was my issue right off the bat. I didn't like the way Jonathan was portrayed. It always looked like he had fucking something better to do. Right? Or was that just me? Like it seemed like he didn't want to deal with anything.
That's interesting. So I guess I didn't have quite that read on it, but you're spot on in that this is a different spin on Jonathan and Martha. Now, as far as their ages, yes, this is younger than we typically see them. Although, look, as a fan of Smallville, I do like the idea of younger, more vital Kents. And I think in more modern tellings of the comics, you've seen that as well. So that didn't rub me the wrong way in and of itself. But what's interesting here, in the first 4 of 7 issues, you get a 1 or 2 page backup story, right? There's one with Doomsday. There's a really interesting one with Mxyzptlk, one with Parasite.
I love that one. It also creeped me out.
Yes. But at the end of the first issue, you have this double page spread where essentially you see
it's a desk,
the desk in the Kent farm. And there is an awful lot of information conveyed in those couple of pages, because to your point, and you see notes and memos and letters and photos and press clippings and all sorts of stuff, but you get the sense that yes, Jonathan is a lawyer. Martha is a veterinarian. They had been pregnant. She had gotten pregnant and was quite far along, it seems, when they were involved in a car accident caused by a drunk driver that led her to lose the baby and then to suffer from depression. We see multiple antidepressant prescriptions on the
I got to touch on that. As soon as you're done, I got to touch on that because of something that I saw, like an inconsistency, which seemed like an easy fix, but you finish and then I'll
those were
because I had a problem with that whole. So she's got a bunch of medications, right? The 2 of them that are on it together that she's taking in tandem are Zoloft and Prozac. You can't take those 2 together. A, they do the same thing. And B, when you add them together, they don't make your situation better. They add like serotonin syndrome and like the rest of these, like this laundry list of things that can go wrong if you take those together. I understand you wanted to make her seem like she was stressed. I get it. But like, was she trying to die? Like, is that what you were trying to tell us in that thing? That she asked for all these different things from different people because she just didn't want to do it anymore? Because that's the result that you're going to get, right? Like nausea, vomiting, like the whole, you can't mix those 2 together. Plus you wouldn't, because they do the same thing. They're just from different companies. And then a lot of the stuff that's on that like, she also says, she'd leave it all behind if John wanted to leave because he's like a real estate lawyer, was a real estate lawyer or something. So their ties, the Kents that we know, their ties to the farm were simple people, man, blah, blah, blah. It amplifies the fact that Clark lands there because they don't know what they're doing. Hey, man, we're going to teach this kid the best that we know. These parents, that the target that they took it from was they were still figuring out what the hell they wanted. Now they got this whole different problem. So I understand if you're doing that, their attitude makes sense. But a lot of it just seemed like not fascination and not Clark, don't do that because people will find out. It's like, don't do that because we don't know. We don't want to know how powerful you really are. Like it's too much for them. Like that's the way I seen it.
There definitely felt like there was more fear at play than we typically see in this telling of the story. But I think you're getting at something that kind of ties in with, like I said, my overall take on this. I think what you're addressing with the Kents and their backstory, I think you're right. I think that there's a way to maybe flesh out their backstories, give them a little bit more going on in their lives individually and as a couple, while still retaining that core, this idea that they are simple people tied to the land, and it's that simplicity or purity or whatever it is that you want to call it that allows them to take Clark in and raise him the best way they know how. They're not traditionally worldly people, right? Yeah. But it's kind of those homespun values that they're able to instill in Clark that make him who he is. And by, yes, making them these globetrotters, there's a letter that Jonathan writes to Martha from London.
Yep.
I think that does sort of undermine what we traditionally think of with the Kents. And this is what ties into my larger point about this work. I think that overall, American Alien's intentions, more often than not, are good in terms of trying to flesh out these moments and find the humanity, the fallibility at times, the relatability within Clark and within this story. And I think there are certain instances where the book achieves that well. But then there are moments where I think they go too far, or they overshoot the mark and don't achieve the result that they're looking for. And in fact, kind of undermine the core of what they're trying to do. And I think with the Kents and that backstory that we get, I think that's maybe a little bit of an encapsulation of it. It's I think, a good instinct to maybe want to give a little bit more insider information into who these people were before. But I think this probably takes them a bit too far afield and is a more significant departure from what we know and what we kind of value about this origin story. So I think this is an example of something that we're going to see in a few instances throughout.
Yeah. And like even facial stuff, like, look, an artist is going to draw exactly what they feel it should look like. Right. When the only reason that Jonathan started to make Clark feel better is because Clark was like, I'm unhappy. In the next panel, you see Jonathan has a concerned look on his face. I don't think he's concerned because Clark's unhappy because he loves him. I think he's concerned because if he's unhappy, what's he going to do? Is he going to tear me in half? And then even when Clark is laying on his leg, which this one, as a dad, this one was really telling. Clark is outside. He's laying on his leg. Jonathan's got his arms off to the side. He's not rubbing his head. He's not making him feel better. He literally looks like a burden laying on his leg. And he's like, I'm not normal. I'm not normal. And the best he can come up with, like, well, who needs normal anyway? But there's no nuggets of the Kent wisdom. You know what I'm saying? And if you take that away, I guess as you go to the later stories, they make sense. He acts like he's Bruce Wayne. He's living it up. He's the life of the party. He's on a jet ski. But then it makes no sense later when he turns into like the good, like dumb farm boy. Like he didn't come from that. Like he came from parents that are pretty worldly. So the fact that he came with that kind of mentality later doesn't really make a hell of a lot of sense. So I wasn't a fan of Dove. That's when I started sending you all those messages. I was like, dude, like what is going on? Like I didn't like the opener at all, but I guess him getting into trouble, graffiti, drinking, I guess that makes sense. Like maybe that was the intention. Maybe.
Well, it's funny because when you started messaging me, I assumed you were up to Hawk already, the second story. But it's interesting that you had that reaction to Dove. But as you were talking about that body language, that's a great, and see, that's why I love doing this, because this is now the third time I've read this story. I never really picked up on that body language in that scene on the porch when Clark is sitting on his dad, and there's none of that, like, you know, arm on the head or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe is telling. So we've mentioned this whole bird idea. So each of the 7 issues is named after a different bird. So issue number 1 is Dove and picks up with a very young Clark. He's a young boy in this, and his power of flight has manifested. And we open this with him up in the air and Martha clinging to him. And over the course of the issue, they're trying to sort this out. A couple of things that I just wanted to mention about this one. One is that going back to this idea of the parallels between American Alien and the Man of Tomorrow animated movie, when Clark is at the drive-in movie theater, they're watching a movie with aliens.
With E.T. It's E.T., I think, right? Because he's like, oh, like he looks at himself in the mirror at one point and he sees E.T. And he's like, they're going to do the same thing to me.
Right, which is a version of how the Man of Tomorrow movie opens. There, he's at a friend's house at a sleepover, but still the same sort of idea of watching this alien movie or movie with aliens and seeing how the humans in that movie react, and then seeing that alienness in himself. One thing that's interesting in the hardcover, at least, and presumably in the soft covers as well, there's some back matter in the book, and they include the writer's original pitch. And there was this, and obviously this got cut at some point along the way, but there was an idea for one of those backup stories. I think this was going to be in the final issue. I guess they just ran out of space because, again, those backup stories stop at a certain point.
Yeah.
But there was in the pitch, there was the idea for one of these backup stories in the final issue where you would see Jor-El on Krypton placing Kal-El in the pod right before the planet is destroyed. But both Jor-El and Kal-El are described as, quote, deeply alien. And the idea is that within the pod, there's a feature called Adapt DNA. So the notion was that Kryptonians aren't humanoid. They don't look like us. They look like something else. And then the pod is able to conform Kal-El's DNA to allow him to blend in, which interesting idea, but I'm not upset that got cut. I don't know that.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about it, but also it doesn't affect I'm like, oh shit, that's kind of cool because it's different. But also I'm like, I could do without that. Yeah. But I do like the fact that, like, all right, we don't know what they look like. It's literally, all right, I'm sending you here, so you got to look like these people. But then it becomes a very Kirkman-esque, the hell is his name? The guy from Invincible, where, like, he doesn't look like that either. He looks like a squid monster, and he's got to take the look of something kind of in the same way. I don't know which one dropped first, but that seems like it's just that. Like, he shows up as a Superman archetype, and he doesn't really look like that. He had to look like that in order to live his life here, to gain, like, the trust of people.
And then I just feel like I know a big part of the reason why Earth is chosen in versions of the story where they do choose the specific planet is for the yellow sun, but it's also because he would blend in. So if he could blend in anywhere, then it doesn't necessarily have to be Earth. Again, I feel like that takes away. It's an interesting idea to kind of play around with, but I feel like that takes away more than it adds necessarily.
That, and you have planets out there with 2 suns. Send him there. He'd be double as powerful. Like, it didn't have to. Yeah, so I understand what you mean.
Yeah. The other thing that comes up in this first issue, and this becomes a theme running forward, and actually this is one of the aspects of American Alien that I do think is very intriguing. I kind of like this notion that in Smallville, Clark's alien origin and his abilities, it's an open secret. And it starts here in this first issue where the Kents bring over a doctor to examine Clark, and he talks about these weird readings that he's getting and
weird radiation levels. Yeah.
And clearly this is not the first time this doctor's been there. And then later in the story, when Clark once again is up in the sky and Jonathan, and he's stuck there, right?
He runs a fucking plane into him.
Right. But he goes to the neighbor, Ben, presumably Ben Hubbard. Right. Yeah. And Ben flies him up in his prop plane. But they talk about how, first it was that he was strong, and then there's heat coming from his eyes. Now he's flying. So,
Pete knows. The cop knows. The cop's like, what are you going to do about it? Like, everyone knows.
Right.
Like, and everyone knows, and no one says anything. Like, was he just supposed to be Smallville's secret? Because everybody knows about this kid. Like, oh, he lifted this car, and everyone's like, yep, that's the Kent boy. That's the Kent boy. It just seemed like if that was their goal, right? Like, we're always going to be safe because we have this kid. That gets instantly torn apart in Hawk when the crazy kid comes back because he feels like he wasn't a part of his family, and they tell him, go do something about that. And then you get mad because of the way he handled it. So maybe that was it. Like, maybe it's like, well, if we tell everyone, like, Pete's hilarious. I love Pete in this book. Pete in every story made me laugh. Like, when he's singing to him at the end about his suit, like, he's great. But you're right. Everyone knows. And he's still afraid. Like, when the cop rolls up, he's like, oh no, hide the beer. What do you mean, dude? Like, you could punch the cop into the sun. Like, what difference does it make? But he still has this fear of authority, even though he's bigger and stronger than all the authority out there.
This is my read / my headcanon for what this book is kind of getting at. I think that Kenny and Pete, they explicitly know, they talk about how Clark's an alien, right? So that's known. He's confided in them. I think beyond that, it's probably a relatively small circle of people who outright know / explicitly talk about it with Clark or Jonathan and Martha. I think the sheriff is an example, the doctor is an example, the neighbor is an example. But I think when you get later into Clark's journey, specifically when we get to the point towards the end where Pete and Kenny come to visit in Metropolis, and they're like, people in Smallville are like worried about you. I think it's one of those things that it was probably a relatively small circle when he was there, but I feel like once he left and people saw him
Everyone
popping up, then they were like, oh, that's Clark. And then it became more of a thing. I don't know, but just it's one of those things. I don't necessarily need that to be part of the origin story, but it is an intriguing idea, and I think probably a pretty realistic, believable one, that in this small town where everyone knows each other, this
and no one tries
probably
to sell nothing. Like nobody says anything. Now everyone's talking about it. You're like, we know that guy. Yeah, I don't know. It was just weird. I mean, I guess it's one of those things that we just have to accept to move the story forward. Like, what else are you going to do?
And I agree with you. This isn't necessarily the warmest Pa Kent or Ma Kent, but I feel like you do see the concern. And I did like when Clark gets upset in the bathroom at the drive-in theater and he smashes up the bathroom, and then Jonathan has that talk with him about you can't be a jerk. You can't use your powers and take out your anger like that.
I understand. It was the delivery that bothered me, because that's how he talked to him.
Yeah.
He wasn't like, son, like, this is what you have to do. Like, you got to realize these powers. He's like, yeah, but don't be an asshole about it. Like, where's the nurturing? But maybe that was the goal, right? Like, maybe that was Landis's goal. Like, don't give him a nurturing family and let him turn into that as he goes. Because even later, the Kents play no part. He's on the phone with Ma at one point. She's asking him if he's okay. His car gets stolen right in front, which I love that part. He's like, hey, do you have a bus card? But there's no Kents later. Maybe the goal of this, and again, this is my first time reading it. I didn't do any research on it. Maybe the goal of it is always proving what we try to prove, right? Where he's always going to be the good guy, regardless of who raised him, right? Darkseid raised him. He's going to be a member of Apocalypse, but he turns later. So maybe with less concern for him, parents, and more concern for what he's capable of, he's still going to take that into the future, and he's still going to be a good guy.
Maybe. So was there anything else about Dove before we move to Hawk?
Yeah, he was adorable in that last panel, though, because he's talking about his flight, and he's not talking about what he can do with it. He's like, we can take you on vacation. And that is the only time, if you look at those panels, both of their Ma's eyebrows are now relaxed, but Jonathan's are scowled. Like, he still looks angry. And the kid's like, I could fly us on vacation, which the next part, the two panels called The Castaways, it literally is like, these people are here and they don't want to be. Like, they're stuck. They're on this island. Where are they going to go? And there's almost like a resentment. I think the scowled look was Jonathan's resentment of like, well, fuck, now this kid can go wherever he wants, and he's got to take me there. Like, I can't travel anymore. Like, you saw those pictures. They're everywhere, man. Now they can't go anywhere because they got gifted this farm. Like, dude, I didn't know she was. Wait, is Martha a veterinarian all the time? She's got a PhD in like animal doctor shit.
Yeah. Yeah, she's a vet. I mean, not in other incarnations, but here she is. And later on, we'll find out in the Parrot issue that Clark is studying to be a vet, but then he has his epiphany on the yacht and then decides that's not the path for him. But
I didn't like the presentation. I didn't like the Kents, and I think that shadowed it for me a little bit because I didn't realize where it was going.
Gotcha.
You know what I'm saying? But the take on it was new, but I think that's why I didn't like it. Because like, I don't want anything to change. Like, he's got to be hanging off the gate telling Clark, it's okay, kid, you're from that. Like, that wasn't there. And I'm just like, ew. Like, now I know why in Hawk he acts that way and stuff like that. And you see it a little bit later too. But then he changes on his own, which I thought was a cool redemption for him.
It's funny. So I think there are moments in this book where there is some heart, but I think overall, and look, in fairness, I reread this right after For All Seasons, which is very emotionally resonant and heartfelt.
You warned me about that.
But there is sort of a soullessness to a lot of this that I do bump up against. And I don't know, and this is hard for me to say, what I've felt that anyway is kind of now what we've learned about the writer of this, coloring it a little bit. Yeah. I don't know, but that word soulless is something that I came up to. And I'm not saying that permeates the entire thing. There are exceptions to that, but like, I look at this first issue Dove, and to be perfectly honest, again, I find the idea of Clark's origin being an open secret, I find that intriguing. The backstory with the Kents, again, interesting, but I think it goes too far. But beyond that, I don't really know what this first issue really gives us that we haven't gotten better in other tellings of the story. Now,
it was just different.
Yes. What's to come, I think, in these stories, whether or not you like it, I think it does add some different angles and some different spins on everything. I don't know that you really get all that much of that in this first issue here. So we segue now to Hawk with art by Tommy Lee Edwards. And we're still in Smallville, but Clark's older now. He's a teenager. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Many of you have already used this code, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. How did you feel about, you were alluding to this earlier, but how do you feel about the characterization of Clark here? He's studying French with Lana. She invites him over. Her parents aren't going to be there. He's very excited at this prospect. He tells Pete to kiss his ass while Pete's teasing him. They're drinking beers outside.
Calls him a cheerleader. He's like, I need to borrow your skirt. Actually, the opening I really liked, and I laughed like out loud about that because he asked, because I thought he knew the language. So Lana invites him over. He's very excited, man. Like he's great. But then he says something slick on the way out. I'm like, oh, he did know it. And it ends up, I'm a grapefruit. I eat the window. And it's just like, dude, of course, because he's a goof. He's just a big goof. Like, I really like that. But then he gets in the car. Him and Pete cracked me up because he was like, he waits the whole time. And he's like, hey, I was invited over to Lana's house. And he goes, stone cold, Clark. You are stone cold. It's funny, man. Like they have this banter back and forth that when Pete confronts him later about how concerned he is and how Clark's not worried about for the people who worry about him because he is this industry. He's like, so what are you just trying to be, like a really cool god? That it really like touched my heart because Pete's thing is just like, yeah, man, like I get it. You're not worried, but like we worry because we watched all this stuff come up. And he's like, and bigger and badder is coming, man, which kind of brought me to like Man of Steel, right? Like bigger is coming. Like you just sent out the biggest flare and kind of Avengers, right? We just sent out the biggest flare saying we're ready for this shit. But I love the Green Lantern part a lot, but we'll get to that later down the line. Yeah, but Hawk, I like how it started. I think that's when I started to turn on it a little bit because it started to show more of Clark, less of the Kents, which I was kind of a big fan of.
Gotcha. So this is where I remain a little mixed, but I'm with you. I like Pete throughout this miniseries. DC itself tells us this is not a Superman story. I think by the time we get to the end of this, maybe we'll land somewhere around it's kind of a mixed bag as a Clark Kent story. Right. But as a Pete Ross story, it's actually really good.
Yeah.
So I think the Pete of it is really interesting and puts some meat on the bone in that dynamic where a lot of times you don't necessarily have that. And it's funny because we just did our 4 All Seasons episode and we talked about how we wish there had been a backup story or a bonus issue or something like just following Pete during this year 1 time while he's trapped in Smallville, having like a George Bailey-esque from It's a Wonderful Life adventure.
On my mother, I put 2 notes. One, I want to see more of the cop, which we'll get to just in how he handles Clark going down to get Parasite. And the other one was, can I get like a 3 run of just Pete? Just Pete being fucking Pete, doing Pete shit and like calling Clark and stuff like that. Like I wanted to see, like, if there was 4 issues of that time of his life with that, you actually see how he's molded more by his friends and like the heart of his friends than he is by his family. Which I think now that I look at it is cooler, right? It's not like he found his powers with his mom and dad. We already know the issue I had with that. But I think he found his heart and his care and his love through his friends, which through that lens, I actually like that later, you know, Ma and Pa don't come visit him. His friends do though. And I thought that was good. Like they actually, he's like, everyone's talking about it, but we wanted to come because we wanted to see what was going on, which I kind of like he's still molded by Smallville, but the people around him that he can be himself around. He didn't have to question anything.
Gotcha. Yeah. I and this is something that I do get the pull of, the notion that he's confided in Pete and Ken. It's always funny with Kenny Braverman, Conduit. It's one of your greatest enemies, but we're not there at this point in the story. Different incarnation, but the idea that he would confide in his buddies, it does ring true. I mean, look, that was always one of the things on the Smallville TV show. It's like, and look, yes, they gave us reasons along the way why he wouldn't, until he had to, reveal his secret to each person in his life. But yeah, there were times where you definitely feel like it just, you would imagine, and you place yourself in that position and you're like, yeah, of course you would tell these people who you have this kind of relationship with. So there's something about that does ring very true.
My adopted mom and dad would be like, listen, you can fly. I would fucking immediately call up a friend and tell them not to tell anybody. And that friend would tell another friend. There's no way I would be able to keep that, because I was meaner and more antagonistic when I was younger. Probably not a good idea to have the power then. But now, because of all that, I become more of a protector, right? But 13, 14-year-old me, 10-year-old me would be like, guys, check this out. I'd start punching bricks. I'm like, what are you kidding? Like, I would tell somebody. So I like that as more of I'm not just going to float in front of Lana. Instead, all my friends know and they accept me, because that's all he wanted. Even when he was watching E.T., what if they come after me? And he's like, but if I stay here, I'm safe with my core group. They know who I am and they don't judge me for it. So I actually like that quite a bit.
Right. Gotcha. So the scene with Lana, I liked a lot. I actually thought that was very endearing, where you see he's very enamored and very excited at the prospect of going over to study. Like you said, the fact that he gets the French wrong, was humorous. There are actually a couple moments in this book. Too. Yeah. And there were a couple moments in this book that genuinely made me laugh. And I can't say that about a ton of comics. So I thought that was cool. And I know I'm really drilling down on specific moments, but that's what we're here for. But telling Pete, kiss my ass, when he's in the car, and the drinking beers right out by the car when the sheriff pulls up, and talking to Pete and Kenny about how he used to use his X-ray vision on people, but then they look too weird under the clothing.
Oh yeah, because everything's bunched up and stuff. Yeah.
So this is where, again, tying into my larger point about how I think there's some good instincts here, and I think there are moments where we overshoot the mark. I think the instinct here is to paint Clark as a more realistic, modern, relatable teenager. And I think
Midwestern teenager. Yeah.
And I think that's a good instinct, but I think in terms of some of the language and some of the behavior, and this, I'm going to make the same point when we get to the yacht in the next issue.
Yeah.
I think you do run the risk. And I think this book commits this of deviating too far from the core of the character and having the character behave in a way that feels out of character based on everything we've seen from Superman before. And I don't know, it's like, I know I always go back to Smallville. I know. It's like, it was like a whole thing in season 4 when Clark went to visit a college and he drank beer, and Jonathan was like, you drank beer? And he's like, yeah, but it doesn't affect me. And Jonathan's like, yeah, you still can't drink beer. So I don't know, maybe that's still sort of my baseline, and I compare everything that I see here against what I saw Clark do or not do on that show. So it's one of those things where I read it and it's like, yes, this feels realistic that any kid would do this, but at the same time, does this jive with what we know the character of Superman to be? And I feel like these are little moments where it overshot the mark. And I'm not saying this was we'll get to the more extreme part in just a second in Hawk, but these are tiny moments, but it just, I don't know. It felt a little off key to me.
It was, but I think the realism of making him flawed like a peeping Tom sits wrong, just because why would everyone ever talk about that? Well, let's face it. If his powers manifested to the point where he didn't know how to shut anything off, he would have looked at Mom, right? He would have seen Martha like that. Everyone. Talk about traumatic, right? Learn how to cut that off. And let's be honest, man, I don't care what planet you're from. If you realize that when you get down there, you're having these human thoughts, going through human puberty, right? We're assuming it's all that stuff. Of course he did. It's just never been painted like this before. And I think that the uncomfortability is what makes me enjoy it. Because it's just like, yeah, of course he would have did it, man. He would have did it till And I like how it was just, I stopped because I didn't enjoy it. He's like, I stopped because clothes do weird stuff to people. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, right? Like when clothes come off, you're not seeing them all bunched up and this is all set and stuff. So I liked it because he didn't keep doing it, regardless of the reason he didn't keep doing it. But he's like, dude, he's a kid, man. He's still a kid who's going through all of the steps of a human. So it's just like, yeah, I mean, of course you would do it. I would fucking do it. I'd probably turn it off for the same reason, though, because you ain't like, I'm sitting in church and like Ethel's in front of me and I'm just like, yeah, no, I wouldn't want to do that. Plus it would start to feel weird after a while.
So when you say like, oh, I would do this, and I probably would do it as well.
Yeah.
This is something that I've been encountering a little tension within my Superman fandom that I'm glad I have this podcast to talk about it. And next week, when we talk about Zack Snyder's Man of Steel and the climax of that movie, I will talk about this in the context of Superman killing, but I actually like that we have this book right now because we can explore this idea in a different context, because everyone always goes to the most extreme. But I think even something as minor as using his X-ray vision to spy on girls here, presumably, I think this kind of speaks to this tension that I'm talking about, where I really do appreciate the desire for relatability. And I've expressed that before. I like instances where you kind of see yourself in the character, but the tension is that versus the aspirational aspect of all of this. And the idea that just because we would do something, does that necessarily mean that Clark should do that? Or should there be a higher standard that he strives for, that he attains and sets that aspirational model? And also, I'm not even saying this guy needs to be a saint. Like going back to Smallville, the exact thing that you described happened in one of the early season 1 episodes when his X-ray vision kicks in and he can't control it and he sees into the girls' locker room. Once he develops the ability to control that power, though, then he stops. And there's a very humorous moment in the next season when Pete finds out the secret and Pete's like, did you ever use your X-ray vision to spy in the girls' locker room? And Clark says, well, maybe once. And that to me is the right line.
The limit, like that's the line.
That's the line. There is that relatability in the sense of like, yeah, he is a teenage guy and he'd have that little moment with Pete and they'd be like, oh, but it's not like, yeah, I figured out how to control it. And then like, I just kept looking at Lana and all these other girls until it just creeped me out. So, so I'm saying like, I think there's a line. I think this goes over.
But think about it this way. All right. I'm going to add now, again, it's not in the thought bubble, but this is what I do. I like to add different stuff just because it makes me feel like it makes sense to me, right? You're sitting around a bunch of your guy friends, okay? Guy friends. Ma's not around. Lana's not around. No one's around. They're like, yo, you looking at chicks underneath? He's like, yeah, but then they look weird. That sounds like something a guy would say to another guy so they didn't get made fun of. So not like, yeah, dude, but I'm not doing that, man. Like that's really weird. I don't think he's going to say that just based on the banter that they all have. Yeah. I think that if I can add subtext to it, he added the clothing doing stuff weird because he wasn't like, guys, I'm not going to do that. Like, that's just disrespectful. I'm not going to do that. Just based on the conversation that they have, they're always busting balls. There's not like a serious part until they come 10 years later or whatever. So I think in my head, that's what he said. But because he never says it ever again, I think that's what he tells his friends so they get off his back. At least that's what I would like to believe.
Oh, that's a cool reading. I dig that. Yeah. So, all right, we have to talk about the most striking moment from this book, from Hawk at least, when, and this starts to transpire earlier in the issue where you have these thugs who shoot up the convenience store and kill one of the deputies as well, or at least one of them. There are multiple bodies on this crime spree, and the sheriff interrupts this trio having their beers in this remote area. Because Pete's uncle witnessed this and they need Pete to take the uncle home.
He said, take him home. Yeah.
But also the sheriff wants to ask Clark if he knows anything or sees anything. Right. And again, playing into this idea of people in Smallville know that there's something up with Clark. And there's a bit where Clark uses his X-ray vision at the crime scene. And you get the sense he notices something, but he doesn't share it. And then later when he's with Pete kind of takes him to task for this. And he's like, when so-and-so's cat was missing, you found it right away. Yeah. It's like, you got to do something. And so Clark now does insert himself into the situation and goes to the house of these criminals. Right. And things take a very violent and very gruesome turn when they start shooting him. And though the bullets don't kill him or fully incapacitate him, they do a number on him. Yeah, because his powers are still emerging.
Yeah.
But it's at this moment where he loses control and the heat vision blasts out of him.
2 arms, yeah.
He slices off 2 arms.
So to rewind real quick, Sheriff is like, so he tells Pete to take his dad home or his uncle. And then he doesn't ask Superman. The way he asks it, he's kind of a dick. He literally goes, you got any ideas? Like, so you want him to do your job. That's number 1. Number 2, when he says he couldn't find anything with X-ray vision, Sheriff Parker goes, thanks for nothing. Dude, what the fuck, man? What do you mean thanks for nothing? Like, he's not doing your job. So that struck me as weird. Like, you have a nuclear bomb in a person, right? He's got X-ray vision. He gives it a shot and he's like, I couldn't find anything. And your response isn't, okay, thanks. It's thanks for nothing. And then he just like pimps off. So he's supposed to handle the law's problems immediately, right? Smallville has never seen, like they mentioned it, Smallville has never seen something like this before. And it happens to be the kid of a family that kicked him out. And he came back all punked out and he's got like gauges in his ears and stuff like that. And it's just like, yeah, but like, and then, so he goes, we talk about lasers the guy's arms off. They have to reset his nose with a ball peen hammer, which now you got another guy, a doctor who's like, fuck is wrong with this kid, man? Like, why did that work? But again, secrets out there kind of, right? Afterwards, the sheriff dresses him down for doing what he did. You sent him there. What did you think he was going to do? Wrap him up in a fucking weed and be like, here you go. Like, you told him to solve the problem. And then afterwards, you're not like, kid, you went a little overboard, but man, those guys aren't going to come back. You sat there and dressed them down like it was his fault. It's your fault. So maybe he was trying to cover that up, but that was definitely not Clark's fault, man. Like that sheriff played him right out for something he asked him to do. Come on, man. He didn't mean go catch him. He said solve the problem. We do exactly what he wanted him to do, and it wasn't arrest him.
That's fair. It's funny because I was focusing more on the Clark in this, but you're right. I think the sheriff is not a good actor in this, a bad actor in terms of kind of the burden that he places on this kid in placing him in this situation. No, I think that's totally fair.
And he wasn't going to do it. Pete's like, okay, well, what if it was your mom and dad? Or what if it was me? That's when we start to see the shit, you're right? Which then grows into the later story of like, I can't help everybody, right? But Pete was like, nah, man, like you have to do something. And he's like, because what if it was all these people, which I thought was using a pathos manipulative argument to do it, but he's right? Like you have the capability to stop this. Now, lasers a guy's arms off and he lives like he's sitting in the hospital with like nubs. And it's just like, don't you want to get rid of that guy? Like, if you don't want the secret, take it out. Don't you want him to go away? Someone's going to be like, hey, man, this guy laser shot out of his eyes. I shot him with a buckshot from 5 feet away and he shrugged it off and then punched a guy through a building. You don't want to cover that guy up, maybe hide him for a little bit. I don't know. It was just like, I think that's when I even wrote as a note, things started to get like the consistency of things started to get a little weird because they had to move the story forward.
Yeah, this is, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I feel like this is another instance. Good Instinct went too far because I think the notion of Clark having this learning moment, this experience where he doesn't use his powers in the right way or he can't control them and someone suffers as a result. I think that's a fair and fine story to tell and lesson for Clark to learn, especially at this point in his journey when he's still discovering what he can do. I think this went a little too far, to put it mildly. Yeah. I think, though, this plays into, going back to that first issue, even though it's funny, the art styles are wildly different from issue 1 to issue 2 by design, right? That's the whole idea. Each of these very different style, very different tone. But both of these, if there's a similarity that they share, I think it is, again, playing into that fear/horror of what this kind of situation could be or could turn into with this alien being with these kind of abilities. And so I think there was just a level of brutality and gruesomeness in the dismembering of this guy that's a bit too much for my taste.
Too realistic. Yeah. Like
for my taste. But I think that there's a way to spin this where it achieves the same result, that he learns this lesson about, okay, I have to control this. I can't I can't let something like this happen again because someone got hurt, someone suffered, without it being, I sliced this guy's arms off.
Yeah.
It's once again, is it probably realistic? Yes. But is it a little bit too far of a departure for my taste? Yes. And here, what I will say though, in fairness, one thing that comes across throughout this book is this does read like it comes from someone who has thought a lot about Superman and has had all of these ideas. It's a compliment that I paid Bendis when I did that episode as well, even though I really was not into the Bendis run. But reading it, it's like, oh, and right from the jump with Bendis, there's this whole bit about how the criminals in Metropolis whisper, right? Because they know that Superman has super hearing and can hear them. And so they don't use certain words and they speak very quietly. And I'm saying to myself as I'm reading, it's like, oh, that's a neat little bit. And that's clearly stemming from someone who's thought about this a lot, about what it would be like to be a criminal in Metropolis and what are the means that you would use to try to get around living in a city with Superman. And so there are instances
why would
like
you have him there? Like, you can't just, like, there's so many times like guys are leaving a bank in a car. What are you doing? In Metropolis, really? Like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, even if you just want to make the comic, there's got to be certain crime that's just like, dude, you're not getting away on foot. You know he lives there, man. The entire place is like his palace. You're still trying to rob a bank in Metropolis? Like, come on, man. Like, dude, like, you have to, again, talking in code, stuff like that makes sense. But all the bank teller has to be like, I'm getting robbed. He's going to show up.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. It just seems like that's like page filler at that point. Like, oh, car 54, we got a fucking guys who just robbed the bank, and they're like, maybe he won't catch us, guy. Maybe he won't catch you. What about his history makes you think that he's not going to catch you?
Yeah. So I think this issue, and here's the other thing that's funny. One of the reasons I wanted to do this episode, I have seen people all over the place with this miniseries in terms of whether they like it or not. Like, I've seen such a range of reactions. I feel like, and it's always hard to try to glean a consensus from the internet, but I feel like this in particular is one where people are wildly split on it. And I feel like this issue is probably, this one and the next one maybe, are a bit of a litmus test for whether or not you're on board with this kind of story. So this was a tough one, and I could see it potentially, losing some people. But
it also was where my rage kicked in, because I just scrolled down and I realized that we left out when Martha dresses him down afterwards.
Yeah.
So he goes home, and I'm going to read it. And like, I try not to do it. Right. But so Martha dresses him down after the sheriff, and he says he could have handed you over to get you dissected. Right. Clark rightfully says, why am I in trouble? Like, what did I do? Right. And he's right. Right. He's like, what did I do? I did what the cop said. Martha's reaction, and I even wrote a serious what the fuck moment here, is she says, what happened to you, Clark? You did this. This was your choice. And then, I'm not some kind of monster. No matter what you and dad think, you can't expect me to just sit by and act, and goes, and what? And she goes, what? Act like a human teenager? Like, holy shit, dude. Like, that was cutting, because he's right. Everything he said, he was right. She's like, well, what do you want me to do? Right. He asked me to do it. I did it. Why am I in trouble? Like, I solved the problem. I did exactly what you said. And she was like, yeah, I just want you to be normal. And then afterwards, she's like, I'm sorry. Like, dude, like, that's a serious gut punch from Martha. First of all, she should have came in and been like, are you okay? What the hell happened? Why did the sheriff tell you to go do that? Instead, she came in with the same kind of fury that the sheriff did, like, all blaming him. You sent him to go do it. That really bothered me.
I know. It's like, teach this young man how to use his powers. Like, where are those scenes? I mean, I know in the first issue they try to help him with the flying, but it's like, where are the scenes of them practicing heat vision on the fence post, right?
Strength and shit. Yeah, man. Like, I don't know. That was weird.
I know. I've not seen the James Gunn produced movie Brightburn. Have you?
I have. Yep.
From what little I know about it, I know that takes this horror angle on and puts a little bit of a spin on the Superman story, but I can't help but feel like I know obviously Brightburn came after, but it feels kind of in keeping, in a sense, of like the horror and the fear angle here.
Okay, you can't see it, but what I wrote was, I went past it. So you just mentioned Brightburn. After I got done with Hawk, I literally wrote down. Now let's go talk about it. Oh, okay. I wrote down that it's giving me serious Brightburn vibes.
All right.
Right. If you're trying to build this person, like in Brightburn, who's like, fuck all of you. You can't tell me what to do. You're on the right track for a story. These bizarro Kents, like, stop it. Stop what you're doing. You're a monster. Calls him a monster. Then the only reason goes to the roof and talks to him. Like, why? Because you're afraid that he's going to kill everybody. I wrote down, if you want to see how Superman goes bad, you give him this family and these situations. This is how you make Brightburn. This is how you make Brightburn. I can't believe you just said that. And that's what I wrote down. That's awesome.
Side note, audience, if you would like an episode on Brightburn, let me know. I'm kind of on the fence, but I'm open to doing something, even if it's like a Patreon thing. I don't know if it would be on the main feed, but if people are interested, I would be open to it. So
I'll tell you what, right now, though, it's the Superman archetype, right? But not the grown-up one. So it's not the Plutonian. It's not Homelander. It is literally like, no, this is what I'm going to do, and you can't stop me. You can't stop me. And then there's a cool Easter egg at the end where they mention a Wonder Woman archetype, an Aquaman archetype, and it makes like almost an evil group. But I think you'll like it for what it is. Superman's not mentioned. Obviously, it's a Superman like thing, but that's James Gunn's version. But I think you'll like it as a movie. I do also think that you'd enjoy dissecting it as a movie without comparing it to Superman, because let's face it, it's night and day. Like, you can't. Besides the fact that he crash landed there, he's an alien with powers. Even how he gets them and how he becomes bad is engineered by the ship, not by people. I think you'd enjoy it. I loved it. I thought it was awesome.
Right on. I will definitely give it a watch. It's on the list. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. So let's jump to the third issue, titled Parrot, art by Joelle Jones. So in this one, a very interesting setup where Clark wins a vacation to the Bahamas, and the plane goes down and crashes in the ocean right next to a yacht that is the site of Bruce Wayne's birthday party.
That is getting thrown for Bruce Wayne, who hasn't been seen in 12 years.
Right. But there's a party every year, and everyone, all the social climbers and fellow high society members, they're always there because that's the place to be.
Dude, Victor Zsasz is there.
Yes.
So is Barbara Minerva, but I really like, we'll get to that. I loved that interaction. I really did, man, but we'll get to that. Yeah, but I'm like, Victor Zsasz, like, what? Yeah, but that's... Yeah.
And Oliver
and everyone
Queen
thought it was him.
Yeah, so he comes aboard and he's mistaken for Bruce Wayne and tries to explain himself. Barbara Minerva pulls him aside and kind of gives him the lay of the land, and he ultimately just kind of embraces the situation and goes along with it, and actually, cuts loose and lives it up a bit. And he's out on the jet ski.
I'm Bruce Wayne. He loved the jet ski and shit.
Yeah.
And he did. And then he realizes really quickly when he's sitting in the hot tub, dude, that broke my heart.
Yes.
They're eating caviar with gold flakes on it. And someone's like, that's a 4,000 piece. He's like, there's a girl back at my hometown that this could have paid for her surgery 4 times over. And you guys are just doing this. And the guy's like, Bruce, when was the last time you ever worried about it? He goes, I'm not Bruce Wayne. And instead of investigating, the guy goes, that's deep. He doesn't give a shit. Like they're so shallow that when he says, I'm not Bruce Wayne, he thought he meant that in like an existential kind of way, or at least faking it like that. That part was really hard. Like I just lost a friend to cancer, right? So when you think about what high society does on a daily basis, right? There's a cake with gold flakes on it. Madonna was eating it like 20 fucking years ago or whatever, right? $8,000 Louis Vuitton basketballs, $6,000 shoes. Meanwhile, the person with diabetes can't get the proper medication because insurance is telling them no. I saw that little nugget and I stopped reading for a second. I'm like, oh my God, man, think about all the people who need help and won't get it. But these people who earn their money, well, in this situation, they make mention that no one did. Lex is the only one that was like, I came up. All these motherfuckers. He says Bruce is going to die of an overdose in a sex motel. I love Lex in this, but he's right, man. He's like, dude, this could have paid. Like, are you serious? Like, this is what you guys are eating? And they don't give a fuck. They're like, yeah, that's what we do. That's what you do. It was tough, man. It was tough. That part was really tough.
That was a great scene. This issue I liked a lot for the most part because
I did too.
I think this struck for the most part a far better balance in terms of, yeah, in this situation, he would allow himself to indulge a little bit and have fun. And he's allowed to do that, but he doesn't forget who he is or where he came from. And that scene in the hot tub, I think, shed a lot of insight into his character and led to another, humorous moment where, like you said, he's like, I'm not Bruce Wayne. And the guys was all deep. So that to me, I thought rang true. There's also something that starts in this issue that pops up in some of the subsequent ones that I thought was, it's not like, oh, this is the only time we've seen something along these lines, but I thought it was pursued in a really interesting manner here. This idea that Clark doesn't know where he's from. He knows he has these abilities and he knows the Kents found him in a pod, but he doesn't know.
He doesn't know what Krypton is.
He doesn't know Krypton. He doesn't know who sent him here. He doesn't know why. He doesn't know if they're out there. He doesn't know if they're looking for him. And he has this moment
so heartbreaking
out on the boat with Barbara where he just shouts to the skies, to the heavens. And he's like, I'm here. I'm okay. I'm happy. And I know I'm jumping ahead a bit, but when we get to that penultimate issue, Angel, where Pete and Kenny come to visit and Pete's really taking him to task. He's like, why are you wearing that on your chest? And he's like, well, it's an S for Superman. He's like, it's not an S. It's on the pod in your parents' barn. Like, why are you doing this? And it's heartbreaking.
Because I want them to find me.
When he's like, I'm on TV a lot and these images are being broadcast. And if they're out there, maybe they'll see and they'll come find me. And that, again, I think there are things in this that really sing. And that to me is one of them. Look, one of the things we always talk about when we talk about the various tellings of the origin is, when does he learn about Krypton and how? And I have my kind of preferred versions of that. And, whether he dons the costume before he knows or not, we've seen all the different permutations of that. But I thought that this was a really cool and heartbreaking and compelling angle to take, that he has this hope, right? That his people are out there and might find him. Yeah. So that I liked a lot. And we also get, and we'll circle back to Barbara here, but a genuinely funny moment in this. Deathstroke boards the yacht
with the bed sword
and has drugs.
Him. Yeah, he thought he was drunk.
Right. So Deathstroke was there to assassinate Bruce Wayne
for Falcone, right?
Yes. Right. And had drugged his champagne. And had that been Bruce Wayne, that would have been the end of it. But it's Superman, and so it doesn't have that effect on him. And Deathstroke is just dumbfounded, and Clark is essentially drunk. Clark is essentially drunk and slurring his words because the neurotoxin has some effect on him, but obviously doesn't kill him. He's like essentially drunk. Deathstroke is totally mystified, and to your point, he just literally flicks him off the boat.
Just a flick,
That to me was a genuinely funny moment. I really, really liked that.
So going back to what I said about other people made him a better person. We have his friends who care about him. Then we have this group of people on this boat that suck, except for Barbara Minerva. She's like, I've been everywhere. She's like, I've seen the stars in different continents. And he's like, I want to do that. And then at one point she goes, so you're not a fan of natural selection? And he goes, natural selection's garbage when it comes to compassion, right? That's where we start to see our Clark come out. And she's like, well, tell that to the bear who tries to eat you. He's like, let me tell you something. If the bear had feelings like that, he would let me go. Like, he's such so now he's seen the worst. So he's seen home. He's raised by these parents that are kind of like in the middle, right? He's got friends that care about him. He's got the law. It's like, do this. And he's like, I did what you wanted me to do and I got in trouble. Now he sees the dregs, like these high profile dregs. And he's like, now, man, he's like, we got to do better. Like, we got to do better. I loved the Barbara Minerva in this, man. I thought that part, the whole part was like super touching. And he even says, dude, there's a quote where she says, or he says, we're all just aliens trying to cuddle or get close. Oh, I'm sorry. They're all just animals holding on to each other in the middle of nowhere. And I was like, guy, that's true about Earth. Like, that's what you want. You want connection. And I was like, dude, that I could have watched them go back and forth forever. That was such a really, really nice part.
It was. I like that chemistry between them. I'll be perfectly honest. The first time I read this, which again, in 2016, not that long ago, I did not make the connection that this was Cheetah, the character who will be Cheetah later on. But yeah, I like the chemistry between them. They end up having sex on this yacht.
Yeah.
And it's funny because now I feel like issue after issue, it's like, I'm not some prude. I don't feel like I'm so militant in my views about how it has to be in the Superman story. But again, I feel like this is another instance where I've said on other podcasts when we've talked about this before, I'm on record as saying like, yeah, I'm all for the two of them having some fun, like two consenting adults. Like, why not? Like Clark, he's a young man. Like, he doesn't need to be celibate, right? Like, it's okay. I was thinking about it more though with this. And this is, again, I feel like another example of, yes, it's realistic and it's relatable and you can't begrudge him enjoying her company in that way, right? But it does feel out of character based on everything we've seen in like every version of the Superman story.
Now, wait a minute. I'm going to pull an Anthony, right? That being said, I love to give the other side because I'm a literature guy, right? I don't think it was random. I don't. They had a beautiful, emotional, connecting moment where they talked about each other, right? They do this. He comes back outside the boat. He goes, come with me. He didn't plan on just hitting it and quitting it. He was like, come with me. And she says, I'm not going to be your animal to hold on to. And even when he leaves, she's like, I hope we meet again. I don't think that was I'm going to get you because he wasn't drunk, right? I don't think it was, I'm going to use her. I think he was so touched by the romance of like the stars and like, oh my God, like he reveals, like, let's face it, saying I'm right here. I think he meant it in that moment. I think he would have revealed to her everything without getting semi-poisoned. Like, I think the poison saved him being like, well, watch this, right? Because he's even like, I'm not Bruce Wayne, right? I think that the intention was to be like, I want to go with you and see these places and I want to do it with you. I think because it's Superman, he fell in love, man. I do. And he was like, come with me. And she's like, no, I'm not that person. Like, I'm not going to be that person for you. And he's just like, all right. And like, he respectfully leaves. He doesn't start a fight. He just walks away. And she even says, she's like, yeah, but I hope that we're going to meet sometime in the future. And we heard that. She didn't yell it, but we heard it because he's Superman. So I don't think it was a random thing. If he just busted in the door and like laid pipe like a fucking savage, that'd be one thing. But they shared emotions. I'm sorry.
They did. No.
Yeah. Again, because I'm trying to save my picture, right? Like my Clark picture. So maybe it's just devil's advocate because I'm trying to create that. But I do think that the lack of, I'm just going to take a girl to bed. Like the first girl wanted to, she got mad. She's like, oh, Minerva. That one he could have got in that way, but he doesn't. He makes a connection first. They have sex. Then they continue to talk afterwards. Clothed, which means they did it, then got clothed and laid on the deck to watch the stars again. I think he was googly. Like, that's what I think. I think he let it go at the end, but I think it was more than just he didn't want it to be a one-time thing. He's like, come with me. He didn't even know where he was going at that point.
Fair enough. I appreciate your point on all of this.
I'm trying to save your picture, man. I'm trying to.
No, I know. Well, and here's the other thing. I'll argue against myself because I've said in other episodes, I've used the example of the Clark from Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, the television series, where they make a point of it that he's a virgin when he and Lois get married. Yeah. And I've talked about how I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like, you don't have to go that far. So people are like, what exactly do you want? So no, fair enough. Your point is well taken. But no, overall, I thought this was, I like this issue. And again, especially the things that we've cited, I think there are a few things at play here that I think really work well. So let's now move ahead in the story where issue 4, Owl, art by Jay Lee. So now he's moved to Metropolis.
Wait.
Yep. We mixed them. Yeah. I'm sorry. Let's go back.
God, you want to talk about, like, first of all, there's no reason for that to be in there unless it's just to mind fuck you. And it was. That was amazing. Dude, I was so offended that he was so right that at one point he's like, you're holding this comic. And out loud, dude, literally I went, it's laying on my desk. Like, I felt like I had to like explain myself, but he's right. He's like, you will forever remember my name, even though you can't say it. But after this, I'm not going to know who the hell you are. When you look at comics as a whole, like, damn, like talk about like letting people know. I thought it was amazing. I took a picture of the whole thing. That's insane.
I mean, that one page backup story at the end of issue 3, and I can't believe I almost jumped over it. So thank you for pulling me back. That might be the best part of this entire thing.
Oh God.
It's very Grant Morrison-esque, I feel. And it's just this one page of Mixus Pitalik talking to you, the reader, about how he's as or even more real or alive than we are because of the power of ideas. The notion that millions and millions of people have known and will continue to know these characters and think about these characters. And every time they're thought of and they're put to paper, they spring into life again and will be remembered in a way that most people are not. Yeah, that was very intriguing. I thought that
was
one
like
stood
brutal
out for sure.
almost. I was like, Jesus, man, like why'd you have to do me like that? That didn't even have a part in it.
Well, it's yeah. No, that's actually an interesting point because it's like it's one thing to talk about the power of these characters and the power of an idea, but this really goes all the way to the other end where it's like at the expense of the people reading it.
Yeah, I mean, or maybe it does match, right? Because at this point, everyone's had their opinions about what it is. And he's like, your opinions don't fucking matter. He's like, because people are going to forget whatever it was anyway. So maybe it was like Landis or whoever it was that was just like, yeah, but you're always going to remember this. You might hate it. You might talk about it, but we're never going to think about you. And that's it. Like, you just have to deal with that. I'm like, wow, like talk about a punctuation at the end of that goddamn sentence. That was tough. Like, I might print that out and make it into a poster and like make it a candid. That's an amazing. But also the Doomsday one was good too. Floating, ending up somewhere. It was just like these little, and the one was drawn by Steve Dillon. I was like, dude, like that. Steve Dillon, one of the best in terms to do it with that simplistic art. And I'm just like, dude, that was tough, man. That was tough. I really liked the little interludes, man. I thought they were really cool for whatever they were there for. I thought they were awesome.
Yeah, again, I wonder what happened with those last 3 issues, if it was just a matter of space, because they were consistent for those first 4. But yeah, the Mixie one definitely stood out. And even if you haven't read the full American Alien miniseries, you might have even seen that page out there to our audience, because it's a very interesting.
It's great. Yeah.
All right, so Owl, we're in Metropolis now.
Lois Lane. So Lois and Clark, they've won these contests with the Daily Planet, and they're trying to get their foot in the door, and they've been sent to cover this summit among Oliver Queen, Bruce Wayne, and Lex Luthor. So these budding, up-and-coming titans of industry. And yes, Clark has made a mistake. He thinks it's some guy named Lois Lane who also won the contest. And then, of course, he meets Lois. That's also the issue at the beginning. You mentioned this before, where Clark is on the phone with his parents. His car gets stolen. I was like, he didn't even care. He's like, whatever. Because he could have got it back. He's like, fuck it. Who cares? Dude, he lives on Metropolis. It's like having a car in New York.
Yes.
If you're in there and that's your joint, whatever. And it was like a beaten up pickup truck that he drove from Kansas. You know what I'm saying? Like, what is he going to do? Dude, he could fly. At that point, it's just a burden. Just fucking take it, man. Actually, that's more Superman than anything else. You need it more than me, man. Just take it.
I know.
Like, that's kind of beautiful if you look at it that way.
This was I like this issue a lot. And we had talked about this when we did our Lex Luthor coverage. I had pulled this issue out and we talked about this. It's fascinating because over the course of the issue, Clark has these unplanned but very serendipitous moments with Oliver Queen in the helicopter, because Ollie recognizes him as a fake Bruce Wayne. First he's like Bruce Wayne, but then when they get on the helicopter, right, like it's clear, like he knows. He tells him, but so he has this conversation with Oliver, and Oliver talks about how he had this transformative experience on the island, and he wants to make something of himself and change the world and all that. And then Ollie introduces him to Lex and it's like, can you give Clark a quote? And so Lex then launches on this whole diatribe, which, we can circle back to, but then he drops Clark off at the kids' fun zone section, where Clark encounters a young Dick Grayson,
which is honestly, I think, my favorite part of all of the comic. Dude, the way he's like, I got to prove myself to Batman. And he's breaking him down in the middle of that. He's like, tell me what's in my pocket. And he's like, I don't know, but it was awesome because he went total Dick Grayson.
Yeah.
He was like this, and he's got this, and he must be this, and he's hunched over. I was like, that's really cool, man.
Yeah, he's like, he smells the smoke. Like he smells the smoke, but he doesn't seem like a smoker. He probably took the Metro. Midwestern accent, hair is a little messy, whatever.
Kansas. Yeah. It was good. It was good. But the thing, just to backtrack a little bit, Ollie has a great quote. He's like, that he's like, I have to earn confidence. Then if I'm arrogant, no one cares because I'm doing it for the right reasons, right? Like confidence is not something you have. It's something you earn through other people. If you're just arrogant, no one's going to like you. But if you're arrogant and you've earned their confidence, they're going to think it's like Conor McGregor, right? Love him or hate him, he did his job in terms of being a dick and proving it. Now people like him for that. I actually like that. Like I like that quote a lot. Like you don't have confidence, you earn it by what you do for other people. And you definitely see the switch. He's like, I'm kind of a douche. Or he says like, yeah, I know I'm a douche or whatever. But he turns it all around because now these three are going to start this power, trio and shit and try to help the world.
Exactly. So what did you think of the whole Lex speech? I mean,
oh my God,
he goes on for a few pages and it talks about a number of ideas. One of them being about how Lex is exceptional, even among the three of them, these young men who are taking over, three young men who are taking over these massive conglomerates. He still stands out even among them. Like you said before, he didn't inherit it. He built this all up himself. And even before that, this idea that, when did people stop thinking that there were those among them capable of solving the world's greatest problems, right? So he gets at some very big ideas here. What was your take on how Lex was presented here?
I loved it because he's like, I don't fucking want people to like me. They don't have to like me. He's like, I'm doing more for the people than both of those guys combined. And you know what? It's not wrong. He's like, so it's not my job to be liked. Okay. He's like, you want a quote? Here it is, man. I don't care if people like me because what I do for people is actually helping them. So being liked is not a part of it, which is kind of a dope juxtaposition with what Ali said about being liked. And then he's allowed to be arrogant. Lex is like, I'm arrogant because I'm exceptional. I didn't fall into money. I earned my spot. That's why I'm going to be around way after these guys are died. Like Bruce Wayne's going to OD. Ollie's going to spend his fortune and stuff like that, which coming from him, he's like, look, if you win $1 million, a lot of people go broke even after they win the lottery because they don't know what to do with that money. They buy a $20 million mansion. They won $30 million. Then they realize they got to pay for all the stuff on a $20 million mansion. So Lex, in that respect, he's right. He's like, plus, I'm not worried if people like me because I don't care. It's not about being liked. It's about helping people. And I'm helping them way more than these other two guys combined. And when you look at it, he's not wrong. And then when he drops him off he's like, this is your floor, and drops him off with children. I was like, what a cool punctuation, man. That's it. After that, Lex is just, well, no, there's the cool part with the window and stuff. But other than that, he's right. Like, I like this version quite a bit. As a matter of fact, the entire way down, he didn't even look at him. Yeah. He's talking to him while facing forward. And when he finds out he's a student, he's like, the fuck is this?
I know, because Lex starts talking about the availability cascade, and Clark's like, what? Yeah. So, no, yeah. I agree. I thought it was a very effective depiction of Lex, and you really get a good sense of his philosophy and his worldview in those few pages. And there is, like, that's the thing. There's a lot of validity to what he's saying when he talks about this idea of fatalism and how if, there are all these problems facing the world, but if you don't even open yourself up to the possibility that there are those out there in society with the means to try to address these problems, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then no one does, right? And he's there to shatter that and break through. Yeah. So yeah, it was really interesting.
And then the Dick Grayson part, real quick. So during the actual interview, he's like, if Batman's trying to be dark, he's really doing a shit job. Like, he's saying it while he's eating, so like all the words are wrong. And he's like, why? He's like, because there's got to be balance. Yeah. He's like, where there's dark, there needs to be light, there needs to be hope. And I was like, oh, that's, there you go, right? Like, we're entering into that now. But even as a child, Dick's like, he's like, I don't believe that he's real. Of course, he's got to say that, right? But he's like, but if he is, he's doing a shit job, because you can't just have all of one thing. You need balance. And I was like, don't get it, kid. Like, that was a really cool detective, really, like, I'm learning philosophy from Bruce. I'm not just learning about kicking ass. I'm learning philosophy. I'm learning how to break stuff down. I really enjoyed just that moment. It was very small, but it was really impactful, man.
Absolutely. And then, before we get to Clark typing up his story and getting attacked by Batman, who, of course,
he owes me a computer.
Right, like Clark came onto Bruce's radar after the whole Deathstroke yacht incident, and we saw him and Nanda Parbat saying, who is this?
Yeah.
And then he tracks him down in this issue. But before that, when Clark leaves and he's just on the street, he starts singing and dancing to himself.
Yeah.
Right? Because he's so pleased with himself, and he's such a dork. And I feel like that to me felt right on the money. Clark. Like that's Clark, that goofiness and nerdiness. So like that moment really rang true. And so then we get to this moment with Batman where Batman attacks him and again has no idea what he's walked into. And Clark makes very short work of him. And
the 3 panels, he tries to hit him with light. He tries to hit him with gas and then bombs. I love that. Blip, blip, blip. And then he tears the costume in half. And he's like, fucking Bruce Wayne. I was like, about it. He was like, yep. All right. Well, that makes sense now. And then he uses his cape, which I thought was really cool.
So what's the bigger story, that the Batman is real or that he's Bruce Wayne? And it's like, and then you see that you end on this moment of him with the cape and cowl out on the roof, and
he's like pondering at it,
what he's going to do.
Which now is that balance, right? What Dick Grayson just set up, that scene on the roof is like, okay, I have this over here. It is now shredded in half, right? So in order, like Dick said, to create, like there's got to be light from darkness. I thought it was apropos that the first cape he wears is this one, right? He's like, yeah, it might look like this, but there needs to be balance. So I thought that imbalance of ripping the suit in half and then he wears the other, the half. I thought that was like poetry, man. I thought that was really cool.
Oh, that's a beautiful way of putting it. No, I think you're spot on. I think that's what's so interesting about this issue is that he hears from Oliver, from Lex, from Dick Grayson, right, about how to go about affecting change in the world. And ultimately, I think maybe he takes a little bit. He probably takes a little bit from each one, but with the Dick Grayson part of all, interesting, right? Because obviously Dick is advocating for why Batman needs a Robin, but he's speaking to this larger idea that then informs what Clark does. We had a question from one of our patrons, Brian Dempsey, and this is a perfect place to drop it in, where Brian said, I really prefer the idea of Clark being the first superhero, that he inspires heroes. Not only is this accurate to his 1930s creation, it makes sense. He's inspirational in actions and words. Anyway, how do you feel about this series bringing in Bruce already in costume before Clark?
So technically, if you look at it, Superman is the first hero. Bruce is a fucking vigilante, right? He's doing whatever he wants. When they mention Wonder Woman, she's the crazy lady with the lasso. And when they mention Aquaman, he's like, and this crazy monster guy that lives under the sea. So even presented other heroes, they still have these bad raps because of what they are. As a matter of fact, when Jimmy does the pictures, he takes pictures of villains and he's like, just to show their human sides. I don't think we saw a single hero right? A quote unquote hero up to that point. I think we hear about them where he's like, oh, you got to go talk to the others. He's like, why? Why would I do that? He didn't know anything about them, whether they were heroes at that point or not. I think he still is the first hero in its purest sense, right? Arthur only cares about the sea, right? And Wonder Woman's like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing here. She's in DC. So it's just like, in terms of hero, I think he still is. I think there's other people presented beforehand, but in terms of him being the first, super like truth and justice, I think he is. I think other people are presented, but I don't think they're heroes at that point.
I agree. Ultimately I land on the side of, like Superman to be the quote unquote first, but I think the way that you're framing it, I think he still is, and it still works. And the idea that some of these other ones are active in some sort of proto form is okay. And I think it works here. I think it works here. So shall we move to issue 5, Eagle, drawn by Francis Manapul?
Let's do it. Oh, wait, first the birth of Parasite by Steve Dillon. There's a way, like the Parasite with the very Corinthian teeth in the eyes. God, that is haunting. Every time I see that, I'm like, there's something, I don't know if it's uncanny valley. Like, I don't know what it is, man, but God, it was just like, it was awful to look at. It was awful to look at. I really enjoyed that. And like him going from like, oh my God, dude. And like the breakdown of like him and his graduation cap to him getting checked, to him shooting up. I was like, God damn, like what did this guy have? He had nothing. Of course he's going to go in for a medical trial. Of course he's going to try to suck the life and energy from other people because he's had nothing but taken in horror. So yeah, dude, that was really good, man. God damn, Steve Dillon, dude. That's awesome.
Amazing. Yeah, and that really did accomplish a lot in in the span of one page. So yeah, I thought that was a strong one. So
Yep.
it's funny. I'm kind of hard pressed to pick a favorite artist in here. I mean, because I think everyone brings something very distinct, but I've always been a huge Francis Manapul fan. I have a Superboy commission from him hanging on my wall. I think, although that Joelle Jones issue on the yacht was great too. But you know who really surprised me this time around, and we'll get to it in a minute, but the Angel issue by Jonathan Case. Yeah. That art was terrific too. So I don't know. I think ultimately I probably still would stick with Francis Manapul, but there are a lot of great contenders here. Do you have a favorite artist of the seven that we've been talking about?
Jock. Fucking that dude. And of course it's the one
Lobo.
I love just that dude. Like I made a deck because I started to make like the one I gave to V. Ken Marion, like if comic book creators were skateboarders, and I made like a couple. I made one from Marguerite Sauvage, who was very sweet. And Jock is one, like just that haunting, like that's crazy looking. Like I love that look. And then Jay Lee, but I've always been a Jay Lee fan. Like I love that simplistic but very sharp looking art. However, in this one, maybe it was the person doing his inks. It seemed a little washed out. It's usually very like hard and very like sharp and deep and saturated. This one really I wasn't sure what that was going for, but at some points I had to remind myself that it was Jay Lee just because it didn't necessarily look like it all the time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Right on.
Hello, I'm Daniel Cohen, former film editor of thepopbreak.com, and I've got a Batman podcast for you. We discuss Batman's past, present, and future, and do a lot of rankings episodes. Yes, we rank the movies, villains, but that's not all. We even ranked all the Batman movie trailers throughout history. Yes, we ranked Batman trailers. I dare you to find another Batman podcast that did that. So join me and frequent hosts Alex Marcus and Bill Bodkin, as well as a plethora of Bat guests, as we discuss Batman and plenty of DC on film as well. Also, fair warning, I'm a BVS fan, but don't let that scare you away. Trust me, I get mocked and ridiculed more than the Martha line for taking that stance. So relax and tune in on the last Tuesday of every month on the Pop Break Today feed.
This episode made possible in part by educator, hobby comic book collector, and pop culture enthusiast Sam Lim. Sam is based in the South Jersey area and is looking to connect with other comics fans as well as retailers. They're also looking for comic shops to explore, so recommendations are welcome. Be sure to follow Sam on Instagram at SZL Comics to see their latest comic pickups and shop adventures. So in this Eagle issue, we've skipped ahead a bit now, and now Clark is operating in public in this proto costume with the aviator glasses and Batman's cape and the S, but with a Kevlar vest.
Yeah. I laughed so hard when he's like, don't do crimes or next time I'm going to get you. Boom, pow. He's doing his impression of what a hero should sound. He's figuring it out, man. He's figuring it out. Dude, that boom, pow, like, I'm going to get you. Like, I was dying, man. I thought that was really funny.
Yeah, that was very humorous. I like this issue a lot. So, I mean, look, this has come up in various episodes, but to me, and it's probably the Smallville fan in me, but it makes all the sense in the world that there would be some intermediate step before he dons the full costume, right? As he's figuring it out, as he hasn't gone, I mean, he is operating in public, but still not on the level that he will. And again, he's wearing the goggles, so there's still some element of disguise here. He hasn't shown his face to the world. And so the idea that there's something in between, it resonates. And yes, it calls to mind the Blur era of Smallville, where Clark was operating in a similar type of manner. Yeah. But that just always made a lot of sense to me. So I like that. I love the scene in the diner between Lois and Clark, where, she, like the rest of Metropolis, are trying to figure out, like, what is this guy's deal? This flying man. And Clark says one of the truest things, right? That could be said about Superman is like, what if he's just a nice guy with a lot of free time who's trying to help?
And he switches after that. They reverse roles.
Yes.
Because she's like, dude, don't be like, of course, or whatever, Smallville, right? And they have, which I thought was Clark and Lois banter that lives throughout every multiverse, where they're actually friends too. They bust each other's balls. You see that in almost every incarnation. And I love that about them. He was like, what if he's just a nice guy? No one's that nice. You're naive. You're naive. And then when the switch happens, she's like, no, I want to believe that that's what he's doing. And he's downplaying whatever it is, which we'll get to because I have a theory for why he did that too. But this is where we see, the cop who's like, Cape guy, let's go. Doesn't care that he flies, doesn't care that he's super strong. He's a cop and he has a job to do. And Clark's like, where do you want me? He's like, you come with us. He's like, you're with us now. I thought that was really dope. He's like, we got something to solve. This thing is crazy. So come on, Cape guy. I was like, Cape guy. Like, I just thought that was great.
Yeah, against Parasite in the mall. And this is his first superpowered threat that he goes up against. And at this point, Parasite, Lex hasn't fully worked out the kinks here. So water is able to neutralize him. And that's how Clark's able to incapacitate Parasite. What I really liked about this was earlier in the issue, Clark's on the phone with, I don't know if it's just Martha or both of them. But
I think it's just Martha, yeah.
And big surprise, right? That jerk, Pa Kent. But, he's talking about how, he tries to perform one good deed a day. He takes his lunches by himself, so no one really thinks much of it. And he says, nothing can hurt me. Yeah. And it's interesting because, at this point in time, he hasn't encountered anything that can really give him a run for his money until now. And so this puts him through a different test. And it is an important, stepping
and following orders, being part of a team. Where do I go? Like, he genuinely doesn't know.
Yeah.
Like, later, again, we'll get to it when he's talking to Lois. He's like, what do you want me to do? He doesn't just fly right in because now he's busting up. I'm going to get you, right? He's doing that. This is something now that could be a problem. And he has no idea what to do. He's like, all right, so where do you want me? So you do this. All right, so where do you want to go? You go high, we'll go low. He's taking orders because he doesn't know what to do. He's got all this power, has no idea how to work it because he hasn't had a threat like this before. Now he does. And we see that he reverts back to, okay, what do I do next? Like, what's my plan? Not follow me. He's like, you tell me where to go, which I thought was really cool.
And then we talk about Lex moments.
One of my fucking, because he's right. He's right. All right, well, you set it up because, oh my God, it's so good.
So the flying man throws Parasite through the window of Lex's office, and Lex very quickly turns the tables on the flying man, right? And really dresses him down with this whole bit of like, you bring him here, you have no proof, you have no evidence,
no plan. He said, Luthor, so you're going to take the word of a monster and throw him in here. Like, that was your whole plan. He's right. You didn't have a plan.
Yeah.
He had such little plan that afterwards Lex is like, this is what you're going to do. I'm going to say that this happened and you had to bring him to me because he wants that rivalry to live. I think Lex wants to deal with him when he's better, more so knows his powers and stuff like that. He gives him the excuse he's going to use and sends him off like a child. He's like, all right, now run along. You're not ready yet. Dude, that was amazing. That was amazing.
Yeah. And he's like, I had all these theories about who or what you were, but it's like, you really don't know what you're doing.
No.
And Clark,
he calls him reckless.
And Clark's
like,
stuttering.
Just a child.
Like, he's stuttering, trying to get his words out.
I'm going to catch you. He's like, are you really? It's just so good, dude. But it does really make, like, he's beating him. Like, cause he's like, dude, you're not like, you're not going to outthink me in this, man. You're not going to outthink me. Like, your whole plan was to chuck him through my window. Now you came to my building, threw him in here, and you don't think that they're going to ask you questions before they ask me questions? Think about that. Come back when you have some more knowledge. Like, he doesn't want to just end him there. He wants to meet him at a level where there's actual competition. As of right now, there's not. There's so little competition. Like I said, he gives him what he's going to do next. And Clark's like, okay. He's like, because what are you going to do? He's got you.
Yeah.
And until he spray paints the thing, but that's later.
Yeah. And it's such a great Lex moment. And it just shows how early days it is for Clark and how he's still figuring this out. And he really steps in it in that moment. And Lex even says, like, you don't think I would have plausible deniability for anything that might potentially lead back here? Like this idea that he, because of course, when Clark fishes Rudy out, Rudy says it was Luthor who did this to me. So that's how Clark knows where to go. But yeah, like I wouldn't be surprised. Well, although I don't know, the new Superman movie where Gunn has said it's not an origin story. So we'll get a Superman who's further along in the journey.
Who's in this.
Yeah. But that's a moment that I feel like we'll at some way, shape or form, we'll see play out on screen at some point. Because it's interesting, I think.
And it does end with now them reversing roles, right?
Yes,
Where Lois is like,
Lois
I want to
Clark,
believe.
yeah.
She's like, I want to believe. Now, here's where I had a theory, right? He's going, all right, well, what do you want him to do next? I don't think that's frustration because he doesn't know what to do. I think he's asking what his limits should be, right? Like, what do you want him to do is not like, so what should he do? It's like, okay, what am I allowed to do? Again, it's almost like he's asking for permission. He's like, all right, well, he can do all this stuff and this and that, but what do you want him to, like, what's his role here on this planet? What would you tell him? I think it's because he genuinely doesn't know. And he's like, okay, you're a human. You didn't like this idea in the beginning. Now you like the idea. You like the idea so much. Like, how do you feel? He's got to listen to all these people. If someone blows a fucking tire, he's got to listen to that shit. So what is his responsibilities? I think that wasn't frustration out of him being angry. I think he genuinely wanted to know what a human wants him to do on that planet. And I think that sets up a lot of like further stories, even though they're not like in this realm. I think that's why he doesn't do all that stuff all the time. He's like, oh, well, nothing I can do about that. All right, well, I'm not going to deal with that. They'll deal with that. I think that all comes from this moment where he's not angry. He's like, I don't know what to do next. Someone has to tell me because I got no guidance. So what should I do next? I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, too, also like to your point about how, you know, maybe this is a Clark who's informed more by his friends than we typically see, where it's more his parents. And then also too, this is not a Clark who's under the tutelage of Jor-El in the Fortress either.
And everything he's done up to this point has been wrong. He tried to do things for the cop. He was wrong. He tried to do right by his parents. He was wrong. He tried to throw him in thinking Lex was going to, he was wrong. So now he's like, dude, I'm fucking wrong all the time. So what should I do? And she's like, just bring people hope, man. Like, that's what people want. They want to believe. And I think that makes a lot of sense for me. Like, the dude's always been wrong with how he used stuff. He did what he thought was genuine. I'm going to throw him through the window and he's just going to cower in fear. And he's like, dude, what are you doing? That was really powerful, man. So like I said, as the issues went on, I liked them more and more for what they were. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's fair. I think the latter half of this miniseries, I think it finishes stronger than it starts.
Yeah.
And we end that issue with, again, the glass is fixed and the Superman logo is painted and he's like, sorry about your window. I'll be seeing you around, right? Or something to that effect. Yeah.
Yep.
So the next issue, Angel, with art by Jonathan Case. We've talked about most of this before over the course of our conversation, again, where Kenny and Pete come to visit. There's some nice bits in here. Again, we talked about how clearly people in Smallville know that Clark is Superman. And again, at this point in the series, now he's donned the traditional costume and he's known as Superman to the people of Metropolis.
Yeah.
But I do love here when they're saying to him, like, don't people recognize you? Like, you have the same hair, the same walk. Like, what if you take your glasses off? And he's like, I take my glasses off all the time. You know what people say?
I look just like Superman.
Yeah. Which is great.
Which, in its simplicity, is the perfect fuck. People always like, I remember when Morrison did his run, he compresses his spine to look smaller. And but it's just like, he's like, yeah, I take my glasses. People are like, holy shit, you look like Superman. But that's it. Because he's a fucking reporter. So it's like, yeah, people look at Katy Perry and the other one. Like, people have doppelgangers all over the place. He's like, yeah, I take my glasses. People are like, hey, you look like Superman. That's it. So we're always looking for like this, no, we need a better cover story. He's like, why can't that just be the cover story? Like, it is exactly what it is. Of course, people aren't going to think it's me. I'm a fucking reporter. Yeah, I do it all the time. People are like, hey, you look like Superman. Then I put my glasses back on. And they're like, oh, that's it. No 6 pages of explanation. That's it. I loved how simple that was, man. I dug that a lot.
Yeah, that was really cool. And so, you know, you see a bit of culture shock. You know, Clark takes Pete and Kenny to Jimmy's photo show.
Art installation about humanizing supervillains.
Mm-hmm.
And people thought he was a genius for it. Yeah.
Right. And Pete and Kenny, they're not quite dressed for the occasion. They look like tourists, but they are tourists.
And they walk away. Yeah. And they're like, and at one point they're not saying anything. And he goes, this is weird. Because they're there to see his friend. And he's getting so caught up in that moment that they just kind of walk away and they're like, what are we doing? Right. So, yeah, man, that was hard. It wasn't like massively hard, but I was like, shit, I can imagine what that must be like.
Yeah, this was a good one. And Clark realizes that Kenny is engaged. And he's like, oh, why didn't you tell me? And Kenny's like, well, I did tell you. I sent you an invite and I left you a message. Yeah. And Clark obviously, understandably, has been caught up. And so that's an instance where I think bringing some fallibility, some relatability, I feel like this strikes an appropriate balance where, yeah, it does kind of ring true that he might not be as dialed into his friends' lives. They're separated by the distance, but also just where they are in their lives. And this, like, we've all experienced this in some way, shape, or form. People are friends who you spend a lot of time with, but you're at different places in your lives. You don't necessarily relate to each other in the same way, even if that bond is still there and you can pick up, but you can see something like this happening. So I thought, all of that felt very true to life.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the argument had valid points on both sides. I really like that because Clark was like, well, all you do is sit around, drink beer, and complain. He's like, yeah, but at least I know who I am. You don't even know what the fuck you are. Like, you're waiting for like these guys to come back and give you validation, which is why you have like this and the S that's painted on the side when like, yeah, but who are you? He's like, your real parents, your human parents, they care. They're here. So why are you looking for like basically these parents that let you go? Because at this point, he doesn't know why. He finds out from Lobo what happened, which I really liked, right? And it was just like, I mean, he's right. He's like, look, man, you have all this capability. What are you doing with it? He's like, you're worrying about your fucking job? Like, your job should be doing all this other stuff. So I did see like truth on both sides of the argument, but that was tough to watch. Like, I felt like I was really following an argument of two friends, man. Like, that was a rough one.
Yeah, I think they each had valid point of views. And I think when you got the valid points of view, when you get Clark's revelation, which we talked about before, of like, this is why I wear the S, because I hope my people will see me.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking. But then from Pete's perspective, Pete is identifying that there's a larger picture here that Clark isn't yet putting together about what he's doing, why he's doing it, what his goals are. I love when Pete says to him something to the effect of like, what are you trying to be, the world's famous nice person, the world's most famous nice person? You're not even that nice.
God. Yeah. He's like, you're not that nice. Actually, you're kind of a dick. Like, yeah, man, like, that's all right. Like, I'm with that and shit. Yeah, I thought that was really cool, man. I thought that was really cool. Like, I like that interaction, especially right before the last part where I'm sorry. I can't miss I love Green Lantern, right? Not a lot of cop work. A lot of planets, but we don't see a lot of policing, right? When he leaves the atmosphere, runs into a brick wall, and like it's Toma Ray and Abin Sur's like, no, man, like, you ain't coming out here. Like, we are here to police this. We're watching you. We know you're here, but we ain't playing this game right now. You got to go back there. And it's like, boom, he wakes up in his bed and they find him naked. They're like, nah. He's like, you ain't coming out here. I love that because they're really on 2814 being like, no, we got it. We're watching it. We're in the area, but we're not going to do this right now. I love that policing of like, we're watching, we're here. We're not going to come down. There's no reason to, but we got our eye on it. I thought that was really cool, man.
That was a cool touch that they've been watching and they just immediately scoop him up. It's funny when we talked about the Man of Tomorrow movie with Tim Sheridan, we talked about how there's that moment in the movie where Superman's in space and he flies back down, his clothes burn up, right? And so he's naked for part of his battle with Lobo.
And he can't breathe because he was talking about, I can hold my breath for 3 hours. So yeah.
Yeah. So again, he tries to, make it to the moon and doesn't, like you said, he gets scooped up. But in this exchange with the Green Lanterns and what they say to him and what they say to each other, he does learn Krypton, right? And that's the note that we end on here. He looks up Krypton. At least now he has a name of the planet.
And he's like from. all messed up. He's like, what's a cryptonym? Like, because he's all frazzled. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. No, that's so that does it for Pete in this story and Kenny. But Kenny doesn't get that much play. But Pete, I mean, really, I feel like, and I guess I was thinking about this as I was reading, but especially in the course of our conversation. Yeah, I feel like Pete is really the unsung hero of this miniseries and a character who often doesn't have a lot to do and kind of relegated to the sidelines. But I feel like there was something here. I really enjoyed those arguments.
And like, he's concerned for his friend. He's like, Clark, monsters are coming, which wasn't that in like in a movie? He's like, dude, they're coming. They know you're here. It's not just going to be all, bank robberies. He's like, monsters are coming. You just fought one. Like, if you think this isn't going to set off something, you're crazy. Like, we're worried about you. Like, you're not worried about you because you think you're indestructible. You want to be this nice guy, but the people who actually know you we're worried because now this is just a flare beacon for everyone else, letting you know that you're ready to rumble. So much so, Green Lanterns are like, this is getting fucking serious. So like, I liked how all of that made sense. Like it followed a track. It was like everyone got involved in the right amount of time for the right amount of time. I thought it was great.
Pete also essentially pitched the Justice League because he says to Clark, you should find these other people. That's the thing. I feel like it'd be so easy to cast Pete as just jealous.
Yeah. Which maybe is a little bit of that in there.
Sure.
Because he's talking about what he would do with it. But I think that's balanced with how he doesn't want Clark to be alone because he doesn't want him to die. He's like, go talk to the Red Blur. Go talk to the Seaman. Go talk to the crazy Wonder Woman. Like, he wants him to find other people so he doesn't have to do this on his own. I thought that was really heartfelt, man. That was a beautiful moment.
All right, now we're at the big finale, issue 7, Valkyrie, art by Jock, Superman versus Lobo. Lobo shows up. He's destroying this building, and Clark intervenes. I did like this issue very nicely is bookended by the Lois and Clark relationship. We start with Clark on the subway, and he's texting with Jimmy. And so clearly Lois and Clark, they're moving along in their relationship here. He had told Pete and Kenny in the previous issue that Lois was still seeing other people. But we're at this point now where Clark had told her he loved her. She groaned. They spent the night together, but then she just bolted at the beginning. So that's sort of the tee up to this. But then we're launched right into this very action-packed issue and this encounter with Lobo, who, as you had mentioned earlier,
he's like, you're Kryptonian. And he's like, oh, no, your people are gone, dude. They died out 500 years ago. I was like, oh. And he did it in Lobo style. Like, I love the way that his character was written in this because he was like, no, man, look, I got a job to do. You can either sit around or die, but you're going to worry about the 60 people that die? Like, no. He's like, I'll wipe out this entire fucking planet. He's like, I don't care. If you get in my way, it's going to happen. God, that was so good, dude. That was so good. I really liked this one. Even though he lost at the end, I'm okay with it because of how it went down.
Yeah, did this feel, because I know you care a lot about the character of Lobo, and we've talked about instances where Lobo's been depicted and it hasn't felt true to you. So this Lobo, this felt accurate to what you kind of view the character.
Because he was there for a job. He didn't go, well, I'm just not going to do it, right? They fight. And what Hal Jordan said when he was talking to Star Sapphire is like, Lobo's the only guy I ever knew that gave Superman a bloody nose. And in this one, we haven't seen him bleed at all. Lobo headbutts him, which no one, like, listen, I was a fighter. No one wins with a headbutt. There's just one person who hurts less than the other person. But blood, like, he beats his head and then tries to pull his eyes out.
Yeah.
And he blasts his thumbs off. He's like, dude, I'm just going to get up and do this all over again. So the only thing you can do is launch him into fucking space. And it was just like, I liked it because there was a fight. It wasn't like an Injustice where he grabs him by the jacket and throws him into the sun. He's like, do you have a job for me? That's stupid. He was there to do a job. And he's like, you're just going to get in the way. So I'm going to bulldog. He didn't flee. He was thrown. And the fight was good. Everyone's watching now at this point. Turn on the TV, turn it up. Oh my God, what's going to happen? It wasn't with Parasite. There was like, this one might actually not go well. And Clark ends up in the fucking hospital. Like, he's banging shit up, man. Like, that was good. That one I was behind, man. Win or lose, that was a good fight. I was behind that one 1,000%. I thought that was really cool. And Jock's art is just fucking phenomenal.
Yes, I think that served the story very well. And I think that maybe unlike the Hawk issue, I feel like here this captured the reality and the brutality of a fight between the two of them without going too far, though. I mean, it's very violent. There's a lot of thrashing, like you said, eye gouging and blood and all of that. But
even the word usage, right? Say what you want to say about the guy, but like I said, we're here to talk about the thing. He writes them very well. He's like, Kryptonians, we use their heads for ashtrays and to piss in. I was like, oh, but he doesn't say it to even be disrespect. That's just who he is.
Yeah, it's just a matter of fact.
What the fuck you mean? He's like, dude, this is what we do with them. Like, what are you talking about? I was like, everything, like they did him very good in this. I don't even care that he lost because technically he did, right? He beat him up. Right. Fucking beat him up bad too.
Yeah. Yeah, until Clark throws him off planet.
Yeah.
So this is, again, just a matter of preference in terms of the origin story. I've talked about this before, and I mentioned earlier how and when Clark learns about where he's from. Yeah. I don't love when a villain tells him about Krypton. And we
Yeah,
got
you
that.
mentioned this before. Yeah.
We got that in one of my favorite stories, Birthright, where Lex explains what happened to the planet. And we get that here with Lobo. And there's something very heartbreaking about it, that he's getting this gut-wrenching information for the first time from an adversary in that kind of context that cuts even deeper. And I don't know, I think for me, it's just maybe that I just love the character and I'm protective of the character. And I feel like it pains me that that's how he learns about it. Now, on the flip side, I don't like when it's too easy in terms of how Clark learns about this. So Superman Secret Origins, Superman the Animated Series, when he just finds a device in the ship and activates it, and then he just is downloaded with everything he needs to know. That to me is too easy. It's like super easy, barely an inconvenience, to quote the Pitch Meeting YouTube series. I like there to be kind of a quest, even if it's just him trekking to the North Pole and throwing that crystal. I like there to be some kind of a quest, but for him to then learn the information in quote unquote safe space, that's just kind of the sweet spot for me. So here there's an ugliness
in
here.
The next one called Alaskan Albatross, that happens, right? Like we have to assume that from that, those beautiful moments that you mean, like but they weren't that, like we didn't get to those. So we get to be like, he would do that. And of course he would fucking do that next. Like now he knows there's gonna be more investigation. He's going to go back to the ship. I would have liked to see that. Like I really would, like an afterword. Like I would have really liked to see that. Cause you're right. I didn't think about it until you just said it, right? In terms of like, now he goes back to the ship, finds the crystal, goes up to the North Pole, establishes, the Fortress of Solitude, then it ends. But you're right. I love the fact that he told him the way he did in that Lobo manner, but it would have been cool to see how he investigated that afterwards. I really do. Like that would have been really cool. But
in fairness, I mean, I'll argue against myself because I do think that the fight would be brutal between Superman and Lobo no matter what. But I think this amps it up even more, that he's just delivered this information to Superman. So that just further fuels that animosity between them. So I think learning the information from an adversary in that kind of context, it can serve a function. It's not
in that way,
my ideal version, but I think in the context like this, and that's certainly what the Man of Tomorrow movie, did something similar as well. I think it can certainly, it can certainly work. And, the other big thing in this issue is that this battle is televised and everyone sees him fighting an alien. And so it just opens up this larger worldwide discussion about who's out there. But to your point, yes, it ends with Clark in the hospital lying there and Lois comes to see him and says she loves him. Yeah. And like, it ends on a really hopeful note.
Look at his face, man. Like, he even tries to talk Lobo down. He's like, please just back off. Let me try to help. Like he's like, why are you doing this? Like he cannot, it does not compute why he's doing this. And Lobo's like, I have to do it. It's my fucking job. Like, you stand in the way. That's fine. But it's almost like we're going back to the fight at the Owens house, right? Where he's thrown into this situation. He doesn't understand why these people are doing this, like why they're attacking. He just wants them to stop. But dude, the face that's drawn for him on that, he just looks like, oh my, like I even started to feel bad. And I love me some Lobo, man. But he's like back up. He's like, let's talk this out. But like, it wasn't trying to talk around it. He was really trying to get a handle on the moment. And I was like, I felt really bad. Like the way he's depicted in that, I felt like I was heartbroken because he's like, because he didn't get why. And Lobo's response is just like, this is my job. Like, this is what I do. And they had a really, like, it was tough, man. It was really good. It was really good. It was heart-wrenching.
Yeah. That brings us to the end of the miniseries. Is there anything else we didn't talk about that you wanted to?
No. For once, I didn't jump ahead too much. But this was really cool, man. This was an enjoyable experience. History of the person aside, it wasn't great all the way through. First two, a little rough. But then, the stuff like, oh, yeah, I look like him. People say it all the time. And the Lobo of it all. I was just like, I was into the jumping of times, kind of like Man for All Seasons. We're going to go here, 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 and here. I like that because some chances were taken that I didn't like the Jonathan and Martha in this one. But I did like that in retrospect, he still got his love of people from Kansas, from Smallville, just not from the people that we expected. I thought that was a bold move. Because at first I was like, I hate them and fucking that's why he is the way he is. But he ends up being the same person, like we say all the time. He's always going to care about people. regardless of who raises them. In this one, it was the Kents, but it was more the people around him and the hue that he took from the cop and from Lois and from Lobo to a point, right? Like it was good. It was good, man. It was good. It was an enjoyable. I'm so glad that I have now an Anthony Desiato list of stuff that I need to read. It's great.
I'm always happy to make recommendations, and I love getting your take on all of this because, you know, you talked about things. I think you saw a number of things in a way that I didn't per se myself, and especially to your point about who he learns from. I think this book does do a good job of showing that, because it's not about being told by Monpa or being told by Jor-El. You really see him gleaning lessons from these situations that he's put in.
Yeah.
Whether it's seeing how the rich behave on the yacht or hearing Ollie and Lex expound their worldviews about how they're going to change the world and seeing what Clark takes from that or doesn't take from that.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. I think overall, when I look at this, the writer aside, it's worthy of discussion. I mean, we got a great 2-hour episode out of it, and there's a lot here. And especially as we've talked so much about the origin story, I think there are some distinct, unique spins that are explored here. And like I said before, I think there are some really good instincts. And I just think there are some instances in this book where it goes a bit too far. But at the same time, what I do have to recognize, and within reason, sometimes maybe there's some value in crossing that line to some extent, or stretching the bounds of what we think the character of Superman or a Superman story can do. And sometimes then you look at the finished product and you're like, oh, no, that was too far. But you have a better sense then of what the line is.
Right.
Again, I say all of this within reason, because you can clearly take this to extremes. But again, I think
and risks were taken. Like any good author of anything will tell you, no one wants to read the same stuff all the time. When you take a risk, people might hate it, especially with something like a Superman, like a Batman, like something that is like Star Wars, right? We saw that a lot, right? So yeah, like I like the fact that risks were taken for good or for ill, right? We didn't love the whole thing, but parts of it were like, but this is awesome. And then other parts were like, I don't see it that way because I want this version. But, you know, like was already said, it's all fan fiction, man. It's all fan fiction. So you can put in, the whole thing of Superman for all seasons and then install some of this stuff. And ultimately you still get the same Superman at the end. Still loves people, man. He's still going to be there for people to the best way that he knows how.
The last thing I'll say is, I was unaware of this, but just in researching for this episode, Landis had this whole quote unquote Kryptonian epic mapped out with all of these different miniseries and original graphic novels, including Superman, but also incorporating other characters of the DC universe, and was sort of this mega epic that he wanted to. And I don't know if this ever made it to the pitch stage. I'm not sure, but clearly obviously didn't come to fruition, and I don't anticipate ever would come to fruition. But there was this larger story that this would have ultimately been a part of, and I was kind of curious to see that was out there. But listen, man, this was so fun. I had such a great time, as always, talking to you. Now, of course, we talked about your cosplay. Everyone should follow at Real Life Lobo on Instagram. But you're also part of another podcast. You want to talk about your dad's podcast?
Yeah. So first of all, shout out to Perry. I did Perry's podcast yesterday. I'm back to back on these things, man. I feel like you, but you do like 8 a day because you have like 8 versions of yourself. Can't wait for that one to come out. We talked about our ranking, our 16 ranking, which we had a great time with. Some of our choices were completely different, but we had an adult conversation, which, I enjoy having those. And I'm a regular on Not So Secret Dad's Business. It's a podcast that it's just 2 dads talking. Maybe some family stuff is involved, but a lot of it is just us bitching and complaining about stuff. So if you ever want to listen to that, I think a lot of the shows we're doing now are live anyway, where like you can join in, you can watch from YouTube and shit like that. It's fun. I got to prep for this one. For that one, I just have to be a jerk, which comes natural. Here, I have to be respectful. But it's fun. If you want, I mean, look, you can, 2 big things. Number one, I found out that next year I was picked for a fitness and cosplay panel at Katsucon, which is cool. I've never been there before. Awesome. And I just got an invite only by Josh from the Paladins of Cosplay to be involved in this like cosplay photography thing where photographers set up all over the place. You get a punch card, you go get these awesome pictures taken. Got married. It's just like everything's good right now. But if you want to follow my Instagram, I'm very boring. Gym picture, pictures of my dog, my awesome kid, my wife, and food. That's pretty much it.
That's all, all very exciting stuff. And I encourage everyone to check that out. And yeah, when you mentioned Perry, so Perry Constantine has been on our show a bunch of times, and he does a show, Superhero Cinephiles. And just like here on Digging for Kryptonite, we ranked all the DCEU movies. You and Perry just did that as well, so people can hear that soon. And speaking of the DCEU, make sure you come back next week. It is the start of our 3-part event called Come Together. Each week, we're going to be looking at one of the films within Zack Snyder's DCEU trilogy. So, of course, we'll start with Man of Steel next week. The week after that, you will be back for Batman v Superman. And the week after that, Ed Gross, author of the Voices from Krypton Superman Oral History book, will be here to talk about Zack Snyder's Justice League. We said what we needed to say about the DCEU as a whole, but I wanted to take one more critical look at the 3 Snyder films. Believe it or not, we've never done a standalone Man of Steel movie. We've never done a standalone BVS. So there's a little bit more work to be done. I encourage everyone, come back, check them out. Even if you feel like, oh, I'm kind of Snydered out, or I've had my fill of DCEU talk, whatever you think this is going to be, it's not exactly going to be that. So just come. And again, the idea is we'll come together and we'll say what we need to say, and we'll unpack these movies the same way we do everything that we've talked about.
Yeah. And people come for you, right? Like, it's like, look, man, you might talk about this. Like, look, you largely talk about Superman, right? People can be like, hey, I'm not interested in that run. You bring on great guests. You are knowledgeable as a motherfucker about all this stuff. And you bring a love to the medium that it doesn't matter really, like, oh, it's Zack Snyder. Yeah, but people are going to listen because they come for you and your views and the views of your guests and stuff like that. So do never apologize. Like, look, you could do a whole year on Zack Snyder and there's a good chance that you're not going to lose any listeners because they come for you because this is such an enjoyable experience. So I know I appreciate it.
Well, that means a lot. Thank you very much. So a pleasure as always. Thank you for coming here. Audience, thank you for tuning in. I always appreciate it. And again, make sure you come back for another all new episode in 1 week. Until then, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.